Hello guys, welcome to Watch Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry was blood adopted by Goblin King at age 5 and entire Goblin Nation swore to destroy Dumbledore? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the King. The Gringotts tax team arrived at number 4, Privet Drive on a Tuesday morning in July, which was, by any measure, the wrong day to collect overdue inheritance assessments from Petunia Dursley née Evans. Petunia had been expecting them since March. She'd ignored 3 letters sealed in bronze wax and one delivered by a very irritated barn owl who had left a small but pointed scratch on Vernon's forearm. The letters had all said the same thing in the crisp, non-negotiable language that Gringotts used when it was being polite. The estate of Lily Potter née Evans requires your attendance regarding assets held in trust for one Harry James Potter, age 4. Failure to respond will result in a personal visit. Petunia had not responded. She had, in fact, burned the letters over the kitchen sink and told Vernon it was handled. It was not handled. The team that knocked on her door that Tuesday consisted of 3 goblins in pressed charcoal suits and one very tall, very bored wizard clerk named Aldous who carried a leather satchel and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The lead goblin, whose name was Sharpclaw, had done this kind of visit 47 times. He had learned early that the humans who ignored letters were always either very stupid or very guilty, and that the distinction rarely mattered by the time he arrived. Petunia opened the door and turned a color that Sharpclaw privately noted as ash gray, the shade humans go when they realize the thing they feared has actually come. "Mrs. Dursley," he said pleasantly. "We have an appointment." Yes. Yes, of course." She stepped back to let them in, and her eyes cut sideways, a quick, involuntary flick toward the cupboard under the stairs. Sharpclaw noticed. He was paid to notice. The assessment took 40 minutes. The wizard clerk confirmed the trust details. The 2 junior goblins catalogued the property records. Sharpclaw sat across from Petunia at the kitchen table and asked questions in a tone so reasonable it was almost kind, and all the while he kept glancing at that cupboard door, because there was a smell coming from it, something thin and medicinal, the smell of a child who hadn't been allowed outside enough. "The boy," Sharpclaw said, midway through his 3rd form. "Harry Potter. Our records show he resides at this address. We'll need to verify his condition as part of the trust assessment." "He's fine," Petunia said immediately. Too immediately. "Of course." Sharpclaw made a small note. "If you could fetch him, please." What happened next took about 10 seconds and changed everything. Petunia went to the cupboard. She opened it. And a small boy with enormous green eyes and a month-old bruise fading yellow along his jaw blinked out at the sudden light like something that had learned not to expect kindness from open doors. He was 4 years old. He was wearing a shirt that belonged to a child 3 times his size. There was a cot in that cupboard, and a single blanket, and 3 broken toy soldiers that someone else had clearly thrown away. There was a little pencil drawing on the inside of the door, a wobbly green shape that might have been a dragon, or a horse, or hope. It was hard to tell. The boy looked at Sharpclaw. Sharpclaw looked at the boy. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Harry Potter, 4 years old, second in line to 2 of the oldest wizarding vaults in Britain, tucked heir to a war hero's estate, said, very quietly and with no particular self-pity, "Hello. Are you here to fix the boiler?" Sharpclaw stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Aldous," he said, in a voice stripped of all its professional pleasantness. "Get out your emergency documentation. All of it." The report that reached Ragnok's desk 3 days later was 62 pages long. Sharpclaw was not a goblin who used unnecessary words, which meant that 62 pages was, by any metric, catastrophic. Ragnok read it once quickly, the way he read battle reports. Then he read it again slowly. Then he set it down on his desk and sat without moving for a long time. His office was the deepest room in Gringotts, cut directly into the London bedrock, lit by eternal flamestones that his great-grandmother had kindled 3 centuries ago. The walls held weapons and ledgers in equal measure, because Ragnok had always considered them the same kind of thing. He was 140 years old. He had negotiated with 5 consecutive British ministers for magic and outlasted all of them. He had authorized 3 small wars and prevented 2 larger ones. He had, in his long life, been surprised by very little. The report surprised him. Not the abuse itself. He had known humans could be cruel to children, he had simply expected Wizarding Britain to notice. What surprised him was the name attached to the child's guardianship arrangement. The name of the man who had placed him there. The man who had known, who must have known, and who had left a 4-year-old in a cupboard anyway. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Ragnok picked up a small obsidian stone from his desk. It was warm. It was always warm, a bloodstone, the oldest goblin magic, the kind used only in the most binding of oaths and the most permanent of family ties. He had carried it for 60 years and never used it. He turned it over in his fingers. Then he said, to the empty room, in old gobbledygook, "Bring me the boy." They brought Harry to Gringotts on a Thursday. He came with nothing, no toys, no clothes worth keeping, no context for where he was going beyond what Sharpclaw had told him in very careful language: "You are going somewhere safe, and you will not be coming back." He had listened to this with the particular stillness of a child who had learned to be very quiet when adults made decisions, and then he had asked, in the same small serious voice, "Can I bring my drawing?" They'd let him take the door. Someone had carefully removed the inside panel of the cupboard door and rolled it into a tube, and Harry had carried it under his arm all the way through London, past the leaky cauldron, down the marble steps into the bank, through corridors that most humans never saw, until he stood in the doorway of Ragnok's office and looked at the Goblin King the way he'd looked at Sharpclaw, direct, assessing, without fear, which was strange in a child so clearly accustomed to fearing things. Ragnok studied him. The boy was small for his age, thin in the way that spoke of skipped meals rather than metabolism, with a lightning-shaped scar partially hidden by hair that seemed to grow in whatever direction it liked. His clothes were absurd. His eyes were not. They were the green of deep water, and they were very, very old for 4 years old, the eyes of someone who had spent a lot of time watching and not saying things. "Sit down," Ragnok said, in English. He gestured to the chair across his desk, a chair that was, admittedly, sized for a goblin, which meant Harry nearly disappeared into it. The boy sat anyway, cross-legged, the rolled door panel across his knees. "Do you know who I am?" Ragnok asked. "The king," Harry said. Sharpclaw said. "The king of the goblins." "That is correct." "Are you going to put me somewhere?" Harry asked. Not accusingly. Just asking. Getting the facts. Ragnok looked at him for a long moment. "That depends." "On what?" "On you." The boy considered this with visible seriousness, the way children do when they sense an adult is treating them as a real person and aren't quite sure how to respond to the novelty. He pulled at a loose thread on the oversized shirt. Then he said, "My aunt says I'm not supposed to ask questions." "Your aunt," Ragnok said carefully, "is not here." Something happened in Harry's face then. It wasn't dramatic, no tears, no sudden brightness, just a very subtle relaxation, like a fist slowly opening. "She says I'm a burden," he added, conversationally. "And strange. And that I make things happen." "You do make things happen," Ragnok said. "That is called magic. It is not a flaw." Harry looked at him. "She said my mum and dad were, your mother and father were 2 of the finest magic users of their generation," Ragnok said. "Your father's family has banked with us for 900 years. Your mother came to us as a Muggleborn and we found her to be one of the sharpest financial minds in 3 decades. He paused. "I am telling you this because you deserve to know it, not because it changes anything about tonight's conversation." Harry was quiet. He touched the scar at his forehead briefly, unconsciously, then stopped. I want to show you something, Ragnok said. He placed the obsidian stone on the desk between them. In the light of the flame stones, it pulsed faintly, a deep, slow rhythm like a heartbeat. What is it? It is called a bloodstone. It is the oldest piece of magic my people practice. Ragnok folded his hands. It is used for one of two purposes. It seals great oaths, promises so serious that breaking them is physically impossible. And it completes what we call blood adoption, which is the binding of one person into a family line as completely and truly as if they had been born to it. He paused. Do you understand what I'm saying? Harry looked at the stone. Then at Ragnok. You want to be my family? The word family in the boy's mouth was extraordinarily careful, like something he'd seen people carry but never held himself. Ragnok, who had not been surprised by anything in 20 years, found himself caught briefly by that carefulness. He breathed slowly. I am offering you a place in my family and in my people. Not as a charity. Not as a political arrangement, though it will have political consequences. As my son. Why? Harry asked. Because he was 4, but he was sharp, and sharp things want to know the reasoning. Ragnok was quiet for a moment. He had prepared a reasonable answer for this, something about legacy and trust and the importance of the Potter estate. But looking at this child, with his rolled-up drawing and his oversized clothes and his very old eyes, the reasonable answer seemed dishonest. Because you were in a cupboard, Ragnok said. And no one who deserves to lead anything should spend their life in a cupboard. And because, he stopped. Started again. Because you asked if you could bring your drawing. Harry looked down at the rolled panel in his lap. It's a dragon, he said. I think. I'm not very good at drawing yet. My people are very good at dragons, Ragnok said. We could teach you. Another long silence. Outside the deep office, the bank moved and breathed around them, the rumble of carts, the distant clang of vault doors, the bone-deep hum of centuries of gold. Harry listened to it like it was music. Okay, he said. It was the smallest word for the largest possible thing. The blood adoption required 3 days of preparation and the attendance of the full Goblin High Council, 7 of the oldest beings currently living in Britain, who arrived in Ragnok's chambers looking variously curious, skeptical, and in 2 cases openly hostile to the notion of adopting a human child into the royal line. Bonesaw, who was 190 years old and had the disposition of a very old sword, all edge, no give, said, in rapid gobbledygook, that this was sentiment masquerading as strategy. Ragnok replied, in the same language, that Bonesaw was welcome to examine the 62-page report and determine whether the word sentiment still applied. Bonesaw read the report. He did not change his expression, because goblins very rarely change their expressions. But he sat down and stopped arguing, which amounted to the same thing. The adoption ceremony itself was conducted at midnight in the Chamber of First Oaths, a room so old the walls were natural stone, uncut and uncarved, lit by fire bowls filled with burning gold. Harry stood in the center of it in new clothes, proper clothes, fitted, in charcoal and bronze, and he was very still and very solemn and only grabbed Sharpclaw's hand once, quickly, when the flames in the bowls suddenly rose to the ceiling. Sharpclaw, who had absolutely not been volunteered as the boy's supporter during the ceremony and had absolutely not agreed to it without hesitation, held his hand back without comment. The bloodstone cut. Not deeply, just enough, a thin line across Harry's left palm and Ragnok's right. They pressed them together. The stone sat between their joined hands and it blazed white, then gold, then settled into a deep, steady crimson. Harry breathed in sharply. It didn't hurt, exactly. It was more like a door opening. Like something large and warm recognizing him. Somewhere in his chest, where there had been a hollow place shaped like no one wants you, something filled in. His magic flared around him, wild, uncontrolled, joyful, and every flame bowl in the chamber surged 3 feet upward, and several of the High Council members took a small step back, and Ragnok looked at his new son with an expression that was not quite pride but was on its way to becoming it. Harrek, Ragnok said. The goblin name for him, agreed in the days of preparation. A word that meant, loosely, the one who endures. Son of Ragnok. Blood of the gold line. You are witnessed. Witnessed, said the council. Witnessed, said Sharpclaw, still holding the boy's hand. Harry looked up at Ragnok. His palm was still bleeding a little, and his green eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears and not quite not tears. Does this mean, he said, very quietly, that I can stay? You will stay, Ragnok said, as long as there are vaults in this earth. The flames went gold again. Then came the oath. The High Council had debated this separately, without Harry present, because what was being proposed was not small. A bloodstone oath sworn by an entire nation was not a political gesture, it was a geological event. It would bind every goblin in Britain, every Gringotts employee worldwide, every member of every goblin clan who acknowledged Ragnok's sovereignty. Breaking it would be literally impossible. The consequences of failure would be paid in blood. What was being sworn was this: Albus Dumbledore will answer for what he allowed to be done to the blood son of the Goblin King. He will be held accountable. His power will be diminished. His mechanisms of control will be dismantled. He will not be allowed to do this again. Not kill him. Ragnok was precise about this because precision mattered. He wanted Dumbledore diminished, not martyred. Martyrs were useless. He wanted Dumbledore accountable, which was a far more lasting kind of pain. Bonesaw, who had read the report and sat down and stopped arguing, was the first to step forward. He placed his hand on the bloodstone and spoke the oath in Old Gobbledygook, and the stone blazed. Then another. Then another. One by one, the High Council swore, and the stone kept blazing, and in the deep stone walls of Gringotts the gold in every vault rang faintly, like bells far underground. Ragnok was last. He placed both hands on the stone, it was nearly white now with stored magic, and he spoke the full oath in 3 languages, Gobbledygook, Latin, and Old Norse, because the Norse had once been the only humans the goblins had considered worth respecting, and old habits persisted. The oath settled. In the chamber of first oaths, the fire bowls burned steady crimson for the first time in living memory. It was the color of a promise that the stone considered permanent. Harry, who had been told he could sleep through the oath ceremony but had absolutely not done so and was in fact watching from behind a stone column in the corridor because Sharpclaw had very pointedly not checked whether he was in bed before the ceremony began, saw the light under the chamber door go red, and felt the floor hum beneath his feet, and understood, in the wordless way children sometimes understand enormous things, that something had just begun. The 6 years that followed were not easy. But they were good in the way that difficult things can be good, the goodness of being challenged and supported simultaneously, of being expected to grow rather than simply to endure. Harry's days at Gringotts were structured the way goblin education had always been structured, without mercy but with complete investment. A goblin teacher who did not believe their student could succeed did not take the student. Every tutor Ragnok assigned to Harry, and there were many, had personally reviewed his potential and chosen to be there. Griphook had not been chosen. Griphook had volunteered. He was young for his position, barely 50, which in goblin years made him something between a university student and a junior professional, with quick dark eyes and a mouth that defaulted to skepticism the way most mouths defaulted to rest. He had been assigned Harry as his ward 6 months after the adoption, and he had spent the first week studying the boy with the focused attention of someone cataloging a new specimen. "You eat too slowly," Griphook said, on the 3rd day, watching Harry work through breakfast. "My aunt used to take the food away if I wasn't done," Harry said, without looking up, "so I learned to go slow because if I went fast I threw up." A pause. "I see," said Griphook. "Then, that will stop being necessary here. No one takes food from you in this house." Harry had looked up then. Griphook had looked back with the fierce directness that was as close to tenderness as goblins usually got, and something had been settled between them that neither of them had the language for yet but that both of them recognized. Within a year, they had the language. It was the language of a shared table and a training room floor and a running argument about whether dragons were more beautiful than they were dangerous or more dangerous than they were beautiful. Griphook said dangerous, because that was true. Harry said beautiful, because that was also true. They never resolved it and never needed to. The training itself was comprehensive in the way that only goblins, who had survived centuries of war with Wizarding Britain, could make comprehensive. Harry learned to fight, not the wand-based dueling of wizarding schools, but the fast, brutally pragmatic close combat style that goblin warriors had refined over 8 centuries. He learned it from a woman named Bloodaxe, who was 70 years old, 4 feet tall, and capable of putting a grown wizard on the ground in under 3 seconds. She had no patience for hesitation. "You pulled that strike," she said, the 5th time Harry stopped short of a finishing blow in a training bout. "Why?" "Because," Harry started. "The enemy does not stop," she said. "The enemy does not ask why you hesitated. The enemy continues. You do not pull strikes." "What if the person isn't actually an enemy?" Harry asked. He was 9, and his specific flavor of sharpness had developed into something that could ask inconvenient questions without flinching. Bloodaxe looked at him. Then she said, "Then you make that decision before you throw the strike. Not during. During, you commit." It was the single most useful piece of tactical advice Harry ever received. He also learned Goblin law, in exhaustive, punishing detail, from a tutor named Goldtusk who spoke in sentences that were architecturally complex and expected to be architecturally followed. He learned the history of every significant dispute between goblins and Wizarding Britain, and the legal precedents, and the financial instruments, and the specific clauses of the various accords that technically governed their relationship. He learned how to read a contract in 4 languages and identify the hidden weaponry in the passive voice. He learned that information was the oldest currency and that the goblins had been collecting it since before Britain had a unified monarchy. He learned, from Ragnok directly, how to sit still in a room full of powerful people who underestimated him, and how to let them, and how to be patient while they did. "The most powerful position in any room," Ragnok said, during one of their evening sessions in the deep office. These were not formal lessons but they were something, conversation and chess and the careful transmission of a very old worldview, is the one that no one else wants to occupy. "Which one is that?" Harry asked, moving a bishop. "The unknown quantity," Ragnok said. He took Harry's bishop without hesitation. "People fear what they cannot calculate. You will be, to most people who encounter you, something they cannot calculate. Use that." Harry looked at the board. "You just took my bishop." "I know. I left it open on purpose." "I know that too," Ragnok said, moving his queen. "Check." Harry stared at the board. He realized, been so focused on the bishop gambit that he'd missed the queen development by 4 moves. "You knew I was setting a trap and you sprung it anyway." "Because I could afford to." "Because I'd already won." Ragnok looked at him steadily. "This is the other lesson. Knowing when you've already won is as important as knowing how to fight." Harry reset the board. "What about when you haven't already won?" Ragnok almost smiled, a rare and slightly alarming expression on a goblin's face. "Then you fight like it's personal." "Is the thing with Dumbledore personal?" The almost smile faded. "Not to coldness, to something older and more considered." "Everything I do is personal," Ragnok said. "I am 140 years old. Nothing remains abstract at this age." Harry moved his knight. "What does he actually think happened to me?" "He believes you are with your relatives, living in reasonable if not comfortable circumstances, protected by blood magic, waiting for Hogwarts." Ragnok moved a pawn. "He has not checked." "Why not?" Because checking would require him to admit the possibility that he was wrong. Ragnok's voice was even, but there was something underneath it, the deep, long patience of someone who had been keeping a precise account for 6 years. Dumbledore is not a stupid man. He is something more dangerous. He is a certain man. And certain men do not verify, because verification implies doubt. Harry sat with that for a while. Griphook says the legal case is almost ready, he said. Griphook, Ragnok said, is not wrong. But legal cases do not move on their own. They require catalysts. He glanced at Harry. Hogwarts letters go out in August. Harry had known this was coming. He'd known for 2 years. He'd prepared for it in the specific, thorough way he'd been taught, not preparing for the event but preparing for every possible outcome of the event, and the outcomes after those outcomes, branching forward like the decision trees Goldtusk had drilled into him. Dumbledore will be there, he said. Dumbledore controls the school, Ragnok confirmed. You will be in his territory, by his rules, surrounded by his people. This is not ideal. But I'll also have access to every student in Britain, Harry said. And the Daily Prophet will have to acknowledge I exist. And our legal position is strongest when it's public, because public pressure is the one thing Goblin law can leverage that purely financial pressure can't. He moved his queen. Right? Ragnok looked at the board. He looked at his son. Checkmate, he said. Not about the chess. Harry grinned, quick and fierce and not at all the smile of a sad child from a cupboard. Also checkmate, he said, nodding at the board. Ragnok looked down. He had, somehow, in the last 4 moves, been cornered. He examined it for a moment. Then he said, with the careful dignity of a 140-year-old king, you cheated. I set a trap 6 moves ago, Harry said. You didn't see it. No, Ragnok agreed. And he was quiet for a moment, and something moved in his face that was not the almost smile but was deeper and warmer than anything the High Council had ever seen there. No, I didn't. The summer before Hogwarts, Harry was given 3 things. The first was his wand, not bought from Ollivanders, because Ragnok did not trust the wandmaker's habit of keeping records and sharing them, but crafted by the Goblin Wandsmith Ironforge in a process that took 3 weeks and involved a core of Thunderbird feather gifted by a North American magical community in exchange for a debt Ragnok's grandfather had been owed since 1743. The wand was 11 inches, hornbeam, and it recognized Harry's magic with an ease that Ironforge described, in his quiet professional way, as remarkable and which Harry experienced as something slotting into place. The second was a ring. Small, plain silver, set with a chip of bloodstone. Not decorative, functional. It held a compressed version of the blood adoption record, sealed in goblin magic, proof of lineage that could not be forged or denied. It also, Griphook mentioned offhandedly, would alert Gringotts if it was removed by force. Not that anyone would try that, Griphook said. Not that anyone would, Harry agreed. The third thing was a conversation. Ragnok called him into the deep office on the last night of August, and they sat across the desk from each other, and Ragnok said, without preamble, tomorrow you enter Dumbledore's world. Not just his school, his worldview. His narrative. The story he tells about you. The boy who lived, Harry said. He didn't say it bitterly, just, accurately. Like naming a thing you'd already categorized. He will try to make you that story, Ragnok said. He will be warm and grandfatherly and he will make you feel seen and understood, because he is genuinely good at that. And somewhere behind the warmth he will be managing you, positioning you, preparing you for the role he needs you to fill. He paused. I need you to understand this not so that you hate him, but so that you are not surprised by it. I'm not going to hate him, Harry said. He turned the silver ring on his finger. Hating people takes energy. Goldtusk says energy should be spent on outcomes. Goldtusk is right. Ragnok stood up, which meant the conversation was ending. He came around the desk, unusual, he was not a physically demonstrative person, and placed one hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. "You are my son," he said. "This is not something that changes when you walk through those gates tomorrow. You go as a student. You remain as my heir. These things are not in conflict." Harry covered Ragnok's hand with his for a moment. The silver ring caught the light. "What if I like it?" Harry said. "Hogwarts. The magic. He gestured vaguely. "The wizard stuff. The parts that were my mother's." Ragnok looked at him steadily. "Then you like it. You are allowed to like it. Being goblin does not require you to be only goblin." Something crossed his face, careful, considered. "You are also your mother's son. This is a fact and not a threat to anything." Harry breathed. "Okay. Go sleep. You have a train to catch." Harry went to the door. He stopped. "Thank you," he said. Not just for tonight." You do not need to thank me," Ragnok said. "It is what family does." Harry left. Ragnok stood in his deep office with the flamestones burning around him and the bloodstone on his desk pulsing its slow, steady crimson, and he thought about a 4-year-old with a rolled-up drawing under his arm, and about certainty, and about the very long game that was, at last, beginning. The night before Hogwarts, in the small room deep in Gringotts that was the most permanent home Harry had ever had, the walls marked with a much better dragon now, and a Quidditch diagram Griphook pretended not to find impressive, and a photograph of Harry and Ragnok at the summer assessment 2 years ago, both of them looking at the camera with the exact same expression of contained, watchful attention. Harry sat on his bed with his already packed trunk and his wand across his knees and listened to the bank breathe around him. He was 10 years old. He was, depending on who you asked, Harry Potter or Harrek, son of Ragnok, blood of the gold line. He was trained in hand combat and financial law and the specific art of waiting for exactly the right moment. He had a nation behind him and an ancient enemy ahead of him and a Hogwarts letter in his trunk that had arrived addressed to Mr. H. Potter, Gringotts Bank, London, which had told him everything he needed to know about how precisely Dumbledore was, and wasn't, paying attention. He picked up the wand. Practiced a quiet lumos, which bloomed warm gold in his palm. Tomorrow, he was going to walk into Hogwarts and be, to most people, a mystery. An unknown quantity, as Ragnok had said. He was going to be underestimated and maneuvered and sorted and studied, and Dumbledore was going to look at him across a great hall and see the story he'd been writing for a decade. And Harry was going to let him think that. For a while. Exactly as long as it was useful. Then things were going to change. He let the light die. Lay back on his bed in the dark of the bank, with the old stone humming around him and the gold far below him, and closed his eyes. He slept easily, the way people sleep when they know exactly who they are. Chapter 2, The Prince Arrives. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock precisely, which Harry knew because he'd checked the platform clock 4 times, not from anxiety but from habit, the same habit Bloodaxe had beaten into him over years of training. Know your environment before your environment becomes a problem. He'd arrived early. Passed through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without breaking stride, the way Griphook had shown him, not crashing through like he owned it, just walking with the calm certainty of someone who knew the barrier was there and that it would move because things generally moved for people who expected them to. His trunk was charmed light, a goblin modification that Goldtusk had added while lecturing Harry on the history of wizarding luggage taxation, which had apparently been a significant point of contention in 1842. Griphook stood at the barrier entrance, not coming through. His role ended here, officially. Practically, Harry knew Griphook would have read every available account of Hogwarts' current staff, curriculum, and internal politics before breakfast. The information would have already been sent in a sealed report to Ragnok. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," Griphook said. "That's not a very useful filter," Harry said. "You'd do almost anything if the outcome justified it." "Exactly," said Griphook. His mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. "You'll be fine." Harry went through the barrier. The platform was already busy, families in robes, owls in cages, cats causing administrative problems, the occasional toad being retrieved from under a trolley. Harry moved through it with the same calibrated attention he gave any crowd, cataloging automatically, 2 sets of twins near the back, a family of 6 all red-headed and loud in the best possible way, a girl with bushy brown hair standing slightly apart from her parents and reading what appeared to be Hogwarts, a history while simultaneously moving toward the train. Harry noted all of them and kept moving. He found an empty compartment near the middle of the train and stowed his trunk and sat by the window with a book, Advanced Goblin Contract Law, Volume 3, which Goldtusk would quiz him on during the winter break, and watched the platform through the glass. He was watching when a round-faced boy dropped a toad and spent 4 increasingly desperate minutes pursuing it under various family members' legs before finally catching it and pressing it to his chest with the expression of someone who has narrowly survived a disaster. Harry felt something warm and involuntary toward him. He was also watching when a pale boy with silver blonde hair and the kind of posture that came from being told since birth that posture was a signal of status moved down the platform with 2 very large people flanking him and a man and woman behind who wore their expensive robes the way currency wears its value, completely naturally, not even thinking about it. The boy scanned the platform with an assessing look and his gaze moved over Harry in the window without stopping. Harry noted him too, for different reasons. The train was moving before the compartment door opened, and a red-haired boy looked in with the hopeful, slightly apologetic expression of someone who's realized all the other compartments are full. "Sorry, is it all right if everything else is, sit down," Harry said. He moved his book. The boy sat. He had freckles and a smear of something on his nose and an old, carefully mended robe and the particular comfort in his own skin that came from belonging to a large, functional family and knowing it. He looked at Harry with open curiosity. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley." "Harry," Harry said. A pause, then, making a decision, "Harry Potter." Ron's mouth opened. Then closed. Then, seriously? "Reasonably sure." "Blimey." Ron stared at the scar, which was visible today. Harry hadn't bothered covering it. My mum talks about you sometimes." "Everyone does." "I didn't know you were, are you really? Have you been at Gringotts this whole time?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "Where did you hear that?" "Dad," Ron said, with the guilelessness of someone who hasn't yet learned to be strategic about sources. "He works at the ministry. People talk. He said there were rumors that Ragnok had, well, you know, done something." He looked at the ring on Harry's hand, the silver ring with the bloodstone chip, and then looked quickly away, because Ron Weasley had, despite everything, been raised with enough awareness to know that staring at someone's family ring was rude. "Your dad works at the ministry," Harry said. "Not a question." "Cataloging. Misuse of Muggle artifacts office," Ron said, with a mix of affection and mild embarrassment that suggested his father's enthusiasm for the subject exceeded its departmental prestige. "He loves it. Mum says it's a wonder he hasn't been sacked." "What's his name?" "Arthur. Arthur Weasley." Ron studied Harry with growing curiosity and something else, the specific wariness of someone who's been told a story about a person and is now sitting across from the person and finding the story doesn't quite fit the shape of the actual human. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know." "More," he waved a hand. "Heroish?" "I'm 11, Harry said. Ron laughed, real and unguarded, the laugh of someone for whom it's a natural reflex. Harry liked him immediately and filed the fact away to examine later, because liking people was fine but it was better to understand why you liked them. The door slid open again. The girl Harry had watched reading on the platform stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other still holding the book. She had abandoned the expression of focused scholarly absorption for something closer to determination. "Have either of you seen a toad?" A boy named Neville's lost one. Middle of the platform, Harry said. He caught it himself. He's probably 3 or 4 compartments back. The girl blinked. Oh. Then, regrouping immediately, thank you. I'm Hermione. Hermione Granger. She looked at them both with frank assessment, landed on Harry, and her eyes went to the scar and then very deliberately back to his face, which Harry appreciated. You're Harry Potter. People keep saying that like I might have forgotten. Sorry. It's just, I've read about you. In Hogwarts, a history there's almost nothing, just that you survived, but then in a modern history of goblin relations there are 2 chapters about the adoption, and the legal precedents it set are genuinely fascinating from a wizarding law standpoint. The Bloodstone adoption hasn't been performed on a human since 1307. And your case is being used as a test case for whether the Treaty of 1752 actually applies to. She stopped. Breathed. Sorry. I do that. Do what? Harry asked, though he already knew. Talk too much when I'm nervous. You don't have to be nervous, Harry said. Sit down. You've read the right books. Hermione sat down next to Ron, who moved his leg over obligingly and then gave Harry a look that said I don't know what just happened but I think you handled it. Harry gave a fractional shrug that said people are easy to read once you pay attention, which Ron interpreted as general friendliness and Harry intended precisely. The Treaty of 1752, Hermione said, not quite able to help herself, technically guarantees goblins the right to legal autonomy in matters of kinship and succession, Harry said, provided the kinship claim is registered with both Gringotts and the relevant ministry department within 6 years of the adoption. Ours was registered in 4. Goldtusk was very pleased. He paused. Though pleased for Goldtusk means he only corrected my treaty analysis 3 times instead of 7. Ron looked between them. I don't understand half of what you just said. You don't need to yet, Harry said. But you probably will eventually, if you're going to be around me. Am I going to be around you? Harry looked at him. Ron Weasley was a genuinely good person. Harry could see it in the way he'd apologized for intruding and sat down without sprawling and offered space to Hermione without being asked, all small reflexive courtesies that spoke to how he'd been raised. He was also not strategic, not guarded, and completely incapable of concealing what he was thinking. In most contexts, that would be a liability. Harry suspected Ron was smart enough to develop a filter when it mattered, but would wisely never bother developing one for the rest of the time. You seem like someone worth knowing, Harry said. Yes. Ron grinned. It was a good grin, easy, warm, making his freckles shift. Right. Yeah. Okay then. The corridor outside filled with the sound of a trolley, and the witch pushing it announced its arrival, and Harry bought enough of everything to cover all 3 of them, which Ron started to protest and then stopped protesting because Harry did it so matter-of-factly and without any edge of charity that refusing would have felt strange. Hermione accepted a chocolate frog with the expression of someone taking notes and ate it while reading the card, which featured Dumbledore. She looked at the card. Then at Harry. Harry looked back pleasantly. She turned the card over, read the back, set it down. Nobody said anything for a moment. He's very accomplished, Hermione said, carefully. Extraordinarily, Harry agreed. The 2 of you are doing a thing, Ron said, looking between them. What thing is it? Nothing yet, Harry said. Ask me in a few months. Draco Malfoy found Harry's compartment 40 minutes outside of London, which was, Harry noted, probably not coincidence. The boy from the platform opened the door with the ease of someone who didn't knock because knocking suggested you might be refused entry, and he looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who had prepared for this meeting and was slightly thrown that his preparation hadn't accounted for whatever Harry actually was. Harry Potter, he said. His 2 large companions, Crabbe and Goyle, respectively, their names worn like furniture that had always been there, filled the doorway behind him. Draco Malfoy, Harry said. The throne expression flickered again, quickly suppressed. I wanted to introduce myself. We'll be important people at Hogwarts. It makes sense to know each other. We do know each other, Harry said mildly. I know your father manages 3 significant vaults at Gringotts and has been in arrears on the secondary management fee for 2 consecutive quarters. I know your mother has separate accounts in her maiden name which are in excellent order. I know you attended Madame Fontaine's primary magical academy in Surrey and tested in the top 5 of your year in theoretical applications. He paused. So yes. We know each other. Would you like to sit down? Draco stared at him. Hermione had gone very still in the way she went still when she was filing information at high speed. Ron's mouth was doing something complicated. You work at Gringotts, Draco said. I live at Gringotts, Harry said. Past tense, from today. Sit down, Draco. Draco sat, and his doing so was a decision, Harry could see, a rapid calculation that sitting was more strategic than leaving. He was, underneath the posture and the performance, genuinely intelligent. Harry found this easier to work with than the alternative. They say you've been blood adopted, Draco said. By Ragnok. That's correct. My father says it's a political move. Your father is not wrong, Harry said. It's several political moves and also a fact. Both things can be true. He looked at Draco steadily. What do you think? Draco wasn't used to being asked. It showed briefly. I think it's unusual, he said, with the careful honesty of someone discovering it's easier to be honest with a person who clearly already knows everything relevant. I think it changes the balance of things. Yes, Harry said. It does. Whose side are you on? Draco asked. And underneath the Malfoy composure there was, Harry noted, something genuinely curious, not the performance of a question but the actual question. Mine, Harry said simply. And the people I choose. In that order. He tilted his head. That's not an answer you were expecting. No, Draco admitted. Good. Unexpected answers are useful. He offered the bag of Bertie Bott's beans across the compartment. Your family has always worked with whoever holds the most power. Your father serves Voldemort, Draco flinched, Ron made a small noise, Hermione didn't react because she was clearly the kind of person who'd already decided to practice not flinching at names, because Voldemort was powerful. He serves Dumbledore's social order because it's the safest current option. You've been raised to read power structures and align accordingly. He kept his tone completely neutral. That's not a criticism. It's a skill. Draco looked at the Bertie Bott's bag and then took it, carefully, as if the action might mean something he wasn't sure he'd agreed to. And what does it say about you that you can describe my family in exactly those terms and still offer me sweets? Harry smiled. It was small and genuine and it had nothing of the hero boy in it, it was the smile of someone who was, above all things, interested. It says I find people more useful as complicated than as simple. Draco left 20 minutes later with his 2 large companions, with nothing resolved and everything different, and Harry watched the door close behind him and thought about Ragnok's voice saying the most powerful position is the one no one else wants to occupy. What was that? Ron said, with feeling. Groundwork, Harry said. For what? I'm not sure yet, Harry admitted, which was the most honest thing he'd said in an hour. But his mother's accounts are in excellent order. That tells you something about who's actually running that family. Hermione stared at him with an expression of pure fascinated attention that would, Harry suspected, become familiar over the next 7 years. You know, she said, most people who say they've read a lot of books haven't actually processed them. My tutor hits me with a rolled-up scroll when I don't process them, Harry said. That sounds educational. It's very motivating. The Great Hall silenced in a way that was different from normal first-year silence. Normal first-year silence was the silence of children overwhelmed by the moving ceiling and the candlelight and the rows of older students and the general massive Hogwarts-ness of it all. It had a particular quality, breathless, scattered, the individual silences of 200 separate overwhelmed people. This silence had a seam in it. It happened when McGonagall led the first years through the door and down the central aisle, and the students at the 4 tables registered, some immediately, some on a 3-second delay, that Harry Potter was not the nervous, skinny, wide-eyed child that a decade of whispered stories had somehow agreed to picture. He was still narrow and not particularly tall, still with the scar and the unmanageable hair, and his eyes were still very green. But there was something about the way he walked, unhurried, aware, looking at the hall with the frank assessing gaze of someone who had already decided how to read it, that didn't fit the story. Harry let it not fit. That was the point. He found Dumbledore at the head table without trying. The old man was easy to locate because of the quality of attention he generated, the way powerful people in a room always created a small gravitational pull. Dumbledore was already watching him. Of course he was. He was watching with the warmest, most grandfatherly expression in his considerable emotional repertoire, and his blue eyes were doing the thing eyes did when they were trying to communicate depth and benevolence, and Harry thought, there it is. There's the story he's been telling. He held Dumbledore's gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he moved his eyes deliberately to Snape, and then to McGonagall, and then to the battered Sorting Hat on its stool, filing them all in the same clean methodical way. 2 seconds each. No lingering, no wide-eyed awe, no visible reaction to the scrutiny. He heard someone at the Gryffindor table whisper, "He's so calm," in a voice that found this unsettling, and he filed that too. The Sorting Hat was unexpectedly interesting. It dropped over his head and went quiet for a moment, the silence of something very old encountering something it needed to think about. Then it spoke in the private warm space inside his skull, "Ah. Well. This is unusual." "Is it?" Harry thought back. "You have a Goblin Nation's oath sitting in your blood and your father's strategic mind sitting in your head and your mother's magical core sitting in your chest, and underneath all of it something else, something quite a lot older than any of those things." "Yes. I'd call it unusual." "Just put me somewhere useful," Harry thought. "That's the question, isn't it? The useful thing and the right thing are not always the same house." A pause. "Slytherin would use you well. You have everything they prize." "I know. Ravenclaw would give you room to think." "I already have room to think." "Hufflepuff would teach you things the goblins couldn't." Harry considered this, genuinely. "What things?" "That trust doesn't always require justification. That loyalty without strategy is not weakness." Another pause. "But I don't think that's your next lesson. Your next lesson is about something else entirely." The hat seemed to almost settle, like something sitting down. "Gryffindor is the house of people who do the thing that needs doing even when every reasonable calculation says not to. You've been trained not to be one of those people. But you are." "Those people die," Harry said, thinking of what Ragnok had told him about his father, brave to the point of recklessness, his courage an open door that anyone could walk through. "Yes. Sometimes. But you're not them, you're the calculated version. The dangerous version." A warmth in the voice, old and amused. "The version that has Gryffindor's instinct and Slytherin's patience and knows when to use which. I only get to see those about once per century." "Then put me where it's most useful," Harry said. "Already have," said the hat, and called out, "Gryffindor." The cheer that went up was enormous, the Gryffindor table surging to its feet, and in it Harry heard both genuine welcome and something more complicated, the sound of a story the house had been telling itself for 10 years getting a sudden and confusing new chapter. He walked to the table and sat between Hermione, who had been sorted 4 students before him with no deliberation whatsoever, and a spot that Ron was clearly saving without being asked. He didn't look at the head table. He didn't need to. He could feel Dumbledore's gaze from across the room with the same clarity he could feel a training hold, the specific pressure of something calculated landing on him. "Brilliant," Ron said, moving over. "I was worried you'd go Slytherin." "The hat suggested it," Harry said. Ron's face did several things in quick succession. "And you, but you chose, Gryffindors do the thing that needs doing," Harry said. He picked up a piece of bread. "Eat something. The food's about to appear." It appeared. The first week at Hogwarts was an exercise in 3 simultaneous activities: learning the castle, learning the people, and managing Dumbledore's increasingly transparent attempts to make contact feel accidental. The castle was extraordinary and Harry let himself be genuinely delighted by it, because the delight was real and performing not delight would have been a waste of energy. It moved, in the specific way that things built by people who loved them moved, not randomly but responsively, corridors adjusting, staircases swinging based on some logic that was half architectural and half emotional. Harry spent the first 3 days building a mental map and the next 4 days updating it as the castle showed him it was more interesting than the initial map. He was good at it. Ron was good at different things. He had a social map of the castle that was far more accurate than Harry's, built on a family history of 6 older brothers who had collectively broken every rule and discovered every secret passage and could be consulted by Owl. Hermione had read the floor plan and memorized it and was thrown by the fact that the floor plan was aspirational rather than accurate. "It shouldn't be able to do that," she said, regarding a staircase that had just moved while she was on it. "The architecture is fixed, the architecture is alive," Harry said. "Fixed things and alive things are different. That's not how architecture works." "That's not how Muggle architecture works," Harry said, gently. "You're going to have to build a new category." Hermione, to her enormous credit, stopped arguing and started building the category. Within 2 days she was navigating the moving staircases with something close to fluency, and Harry could see her sorting the castle's logic in real time, categorizing its exceptions, updating her map on the fly. She was, he thought, the most genuinely formidable person he'd met outside Gringotts who wasn't actively employed in combat. The people were more complicated than the castle. Hogwarts ran on a social ecosystem that had been evolving for 1,000 years, and like all old ecosystems it had gone slightly strange in the corners. There were hierarchies within houses, ancient rivalries, inherited loyalties, friendship groups that were actually political alliances, and a general understanding that everyone knows certain things that turned out, on examination, to mean certain people with certain backgrounds know these things and everyone else is catching up. Harry, who had grown up watching goblins run the most complicated financial institution in the magical world, found this transparent and slightly charming. He moved through it easily, not manipulating exactly but navigating, saying the right amount, asking the right questions, letting people tell him things they'd meant to be more careful about. The exception was Neville Longbottom, who was a genuine surprise. Neville, the round-faced toad rescuer from the platform, had been sorted into Gryffindor with an expression suggesting the hat had made a clerical error, and he occupied his seat at the Gryffindor table with the posture of someone waiting to be told to sit somewhere else. He forgot things, dropped things, and apologized for existing at a rate that Harry found, by the second day, actively painful to observe, not because the behavior was irritating but because Harry recognized it, the deep cellular conditioning of someone who had spent years being made to feel that taking up space was a presumption. After herbology on Thursday, in which Neville had, in the space of 20 minutes, demonstrated a genuine, almost eerie intuitive connection with the plants and then apologized twice for accidentally doing well, Harry fell into step beside him on the way back to the castle. "You knew the classification for the Devil's Snare before Sprout asked," Harry said. I read ahead," Neville said, with the automatic apology in his voice. "Reading ahead is good." "I didn't do it on purpose," Neville said, which was a fascinating answer. "I mean, plants are easy. My gran has a greenhouse. They're easier than people." "A lot of things are easier than people," Harry said. Neville glanced at him sideways, the quick, slightly disbelieving look of someone receiving uncomplicated kindness and waiting for the catch. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "You say that the same way everyone else does, but your version means something different." Neville was quiet for a moment. "Your parents and mine, they were, the war, my parents were Aurors." He stopped. "They got hurt. In the war. They're in St. Mungo's." The last sentence landed flat and clean with the specific flatness of someone who has said it many times. "Gran raised me. She says I should be more like my father, but I'm mostly just." He stopped again. "You're yourself," Harry said. "That's not a problem. She thinks it is." "She's wrong," Harry said, very simply. "And you know more about plants than anyone in that class, including Sprout." Neville looked at him, and something shifted, small, foundational, the way the first stone shifts in a landslide. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They walked the rest of the way back to the castle in a comfortable silence, and when they reached the entrance hall Neville said, "See you at dinner," in a tone that was about 3% less apologetic than everything he'd said all week. Harry counted it as progress. The problem with Snape was not the hostility. Harry had expected hostility. Griphook had been absolutely scathing about Severus Snape in the pre-Hogwarts briefing, covering both his Death Eater history and his pedagogical style with equal distaste. The hostility was a known quantity. The problem was that Snape was interesting. Not good. Harry wasn't confused about that. Snape's first potions class was a masterclass in targeted psychological cruelty designed to destabilize new students and establish dominance through humiliation, and Harry sat through it with his face set to the expression Ragnok had called the blank ledger, completely neutral, giving nothing back. But Snape was also, clearly, a sophisticated and brilliant man operating in a role that was roughly equivalent to a master swordsmith being employed to sharpen kitchen knives, and the frustration of that mismatch was visible in everything he did. The specific problem arose when Snape looked at Harry for the first time in the class and his face did something unexpected, a flicker, quickly gone, that was not the contempt he used on everyone else. It was something more complicated. Something that had Lily Potter's face and James Potter's memory and 10 years of managed guilt behind it and wanted to come out as cruelty because cruelty was easier than the alternative. Harry filed it away. He didn't know what to do with it yet, but he knew it mattered. "Mr. Potter," Snape said, in the dangerous silky voice he'd already established as his instrument of choice. "Our new celebrity. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "The draft of living death," Harry said. Snape blinked. Almost invisible, but Harry had been trained to watch faces. "And where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "A goat's stomach," Harry said. Though it's worth noting that synthetic bezoars have been developed by goblin apothecaries that are 60% more effective and significantly cheaper than the naturally occurring ones, which has been a point of tension with the wizarding potion supply chain for about 30 years. The class had gone very quiet. Snape studied him. The complicated thing was happening in his face again. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant. Also called aconite. The name difference is regional." Harry paused. "Though I suspect you know that and you're testing whether I do." It was the last part that did it. Not the knowledge, the transparency about what was happening. Snape's eyes narrowed, and Harry could see the reassessment happening in real time. This was not James Potter performing confidence. This was something that had been trained. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, which was clearly not what he'd intended to say, and moved on with an expression of controlled displeasure. Ron kicked Harry under the table. Harry kicked back without looking. "How did you know all that?" Ron whispered, "During the actual practical work." "Goblin apothecary is a separate discipline," Harry said, cutting his ingredients with the clean precise movements Griphook had insisted on when he decided, 3 years ago, that Harry should be able to hold himself in any wizarding context. "I cross-referenced it with wizarding potions theory." They're more similar than either side admits. Did you just make Snape give us points? He was going to take them. I changed the conversation. Ron stared at his cauldron. You're a bit terrifying, you know that? I'm 11, Harry said. You keep saying that like it makes you less terrifying. Harry smiled, tipped his lacewing flies in at precisely the right moment, and watched his potion turn exactly the right shade of pale blue. Dumbledore's first move came on Friday afternoon. It was presented as a happy accident. Harry was in the library, going through his transfiguration notes, and the headmaster appeared at the end of his row with the gentle air of someone who'd been wandering and happened to find him there. He settled into the chair across from Harry with the ease of someone in a room that is entirely his own, and he smiled, warm, grandfatherly, the full weight of his considerable charm deployed at comfortable low setting. Harry, he said. I was hoping we might have a moment to talk. Harry looked up from his notes. He'd been expecting this, the only variable had been the timing and the framing. He'd placed the over-under at a week. Of course, he said. I imagine this has all been rather a change, Dumbledore said, and his voice carried that specific quality of someone who communicates care by reminding you that they understand your situation. Hogwarts is quite different from Gringotts. It is, Harry agreed. The architecture is more surprising. The food is better. The library is excellent. Dumbledore's eyes did their twinkling thing. You've settled in remarkably well. Your teachers speak very highly of you. Harry waited. I wanted you to know, Dumbledore said, that my door is always open to you. Whatever you need, guidance, conversation, any questions about your situation. He paused, and the pause had texture to it, the texture of someone about to land on the actual point. Your history is complex, Harry. There are things about who you are, about your parents, about what happened that night, that it may be useful to speak of when you're ready. That's generous, Harry said. His voice was even. I do have one question. Of course. When was the last time you checked on my living situation at the Dursleys? The warmth didn't leave Dumbledore's face. It redistributed slightly, finding new positions. His eyes continued their twinkling, but the twinkle was working harder than it had been. I had people monitoring the house. When did you personally check? Harry said. Not monitoring charms. Not intermediaries. You. A pause. Harry, the blood protection was, blood protection protects against Voldemort specifically, Harry said. It doesn't protect against human cruelty. Which is a different category. He held Dumbledore's gaze with the complete steadiness Ragnok had spent years teaching him. I'm not angry, he added, which was mostly true. I'm clarifying. Because I want us to understand each other accurately from the start. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, genuine and complicated and too deep to read in a first conversation, which meant Harry would need more data. Then he said, You're quite remarkable, you know. Thank you, Harry said. Was there anything else? Not today, Dumbledore said. He stood, smoothly, with the grace of someone who had been managing conversations for a very long time. But Harry, I hope you know that whatever your situation with Gringotts, whoever you've become there, you are also James and Lily's son. That matters too. I know, Harry said. I think about them a lot. He let the silence that followed sit there, and Dumbledore let it sit with him, and they looked at each other across the library table, the old certain man and the boy he'd miscalculated, and both of them understood, in that moment, that the conversation they'd actually been having was much larger than the one they'd spoken aloud. Dumbledore left. Harry watched him go, then looked back at his notes. His hand wasn't shaking. He'd half expected it to. The man was genuinely imposing, a gravity well of charisma and intelligence and accumulated power. But his hand was steady, and his thoughts were clear, and he felt, somewhere in the back of his blood where the bloodstone adoption lived, a warm, steady pulse that was Ragnok's oath settling in his bones like an anchor. He picked up his quill. He had transfiguration notes to finish. Saturday evening, sitting in the common room with Ron and Hermione and the crackling fire throwing gold across the walls, Hermione said, "He's going to keep trying to recruit you." "Yes," Harry said. "What are you going to do?" Harry looked at the fire. Outside, the castle moved gently around them, the living architecture shifting in its sleep. Somewhere deep under London, in a room cut from bedrock, his father was reading reports and drinking something bitter that the Goblin court called tea and thinking in the long, patient, geological way that had managed an entire nation for a century. "What Ragnok would do," Harry said. "Let him try. Stay unknown. Keep learning. Pick the moment." Ron, who was supposed to be doing his charms homework, had long since given up and was just listening. "What moment?" Harry turned the ring on his finger. The bloodstone chip caught the firelight and went briefly, deeply red. "When Dumbledore finally has to choose between the story he's been telling and the truth," Harry said. "Everyone has a moment like that. We just have to be ready when his comes." Hermione pulled her knees to her chest. "That could take years." "That's fine," Harry said. He meant it. He was 11 years old, and he had a nation behind him and an oath in his blood and a Goblin King's patience sitting somewhere in his chest, and he had the whole enormous alive castle around him and 2 new people sitting beside him who were going to matter. He could already tell, the way foundations matter. He could wait. He was very good at waiting. Chapter 3, What Gringotts Knows the Dog was the first thing Harry noticed. Not the trapdoor, that came later, but the dog, on their second day back from the Halloween feast, when Percy Weasley had herded the first years away from the third-floor corridor with the specific energy of someone who had been told something was forbidden and had transformed that instruction into personal identity. Harry had seen the door. The corridor. The particular quality of silence on the other side of it, which was not the silence of an empty room but the silence of a room that was holding very still. He'd filed it and said nothing. Now it was November, cold and grey, and Harry sat in the Ollery with a letter he'd been composing for 3 days, watching his breath mist in the morning air while Ragnok's assigned owl, a large, serious bird named Ledger who communicated disapproval through posture, waited with professional patience. The letter was careful in the way all his correspondence with Gringotts was careful. Not coded, codes drew attention, but layered, the relevant information embedded in what looked like routine reporting. His tutors had told him about the third-floor corridor in the second paragraph of a potion's progress update. What he needed back was confirmation of what he already suspected. He already knew most of it. The problem was that knowing and confirming were different things, and Goldtusk had spent 3 years grinding the distinction into him with the rolled-up scroll. Ledger took the letter and went, and Harry went to breakfast. The reply came 4 days later, folded into a routine vault status update that the other students had learned to ignore because Harry received institutional post from Gringotts twice a week and it was universally boring unless you understood what you were reading. Hermione understood what she was reading approximately 30 seconds after Harry showed her, because Harry had decided early that managing information alone was less effective than managing it with people he trusted, and Hermione had been on that list since the second week. "The stone," she said, very quietly, in the corner of the library where they'd established a kind of unofficial base because it was equidistant from the restricted section and the exit and had a good sightline to the door. Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. "Moved from Vault 713 in July," Harry said. "By Hagrid, on Dumbledore's order. The same day Dumbledore took me," he stopped. "Recalibrated. The same day he arranged to meet me at the Leaky Cauldron. Except he didn't meet me, because I wasn't there to meet, because I've been at Gringotts." Hermione absorbed this. "He went to get the stone on the same day he expected to collect you. On the same day he expected to introduce himself to me, yes. Probably planned to bring me to Diagon Alley himself. Control the first impression of the wizarding world." Harry turned a page of the vault report without reading it. He moved the stone instead. "Either the timing was coincidental." "It wasn't," Hermione said. No, Harry agreed. It wasn't. He needed the stone here, where he could watch it. Whatever's threatening it was already moving in July. Ron, who had his charms textbook open but had been listening for 10 minutes, said, Voldemort. Neither Harry nor Hermione responded to the flinch the name produced in the students at a nearby table. It fits, Ron said, recovering. He's not dead, is he? My dad thinks he's not dead. The sightings in Albania, your father's information is good, Harry said. Ragnok's report confirms something in Albania, though not with specific detail. Whatever's left of Voldemort is weak. He needs something to restore himself. He set the vault report down. The stone makes a body possible. He knows it's here. He's been trying to get it. But Dumbledore's protections, Hermione started, are meant to stop Voldemort directly, yes. They're very impressive. Harry looked at the table. They're not designed to stop a human intermediary. The three of them sat with that for a moment. Someone at the school, Ron said. Someone who can get to the third floor without attracting attention, Harry said. Someone Dumbledore trusts or at least doesn't suspect. He paused. We have a short list and most of them are obvious misdirection. Snape, Ron said immediately. Snape is obvious, Harry said. Which means either he is obvious because he actually is the one, or he's obvious because someone wants him to be looked at. He turned the ring on his finger. Snape is a complicated person doing complicated things for complicated reasons. I don't think he's working for Voldemort. Based on what? Hermione asked. The way he looked at me in potions. Harry said it plainly, not dramatically. Whatever Snape feels about me, some of it is guilt. People working for the thing that killed your source of guilt don't look guilty. They look resolved. Hermione stared at him. You got all that from one look? I got a hypothesis from one look, Harry said. It's consistent with everything else. He was a Death Eater. He changed sides. Dumbledore trusts him, which means his change of allegiance had terms. He paused. Also Griphook called him, in his pre-Hogwarts briefing, a man paying a debt he can never clear, and Griphook is rarely wrong about people's financial relationship with their own conscience. Griphook sounds frightening, Ron said. He's the best person I know, Harry said simply. The morning Quirrell started wearing the turban was a Tuesday in late November, and Harry noticed it the same way he noticed everything, categorically, without reaction. Filing it under unusual, requires monitoring. He had, to be fair, noticed Quirrell before the turban. The defense against the dark arts professor was a performance of nervous inadequacy that was calibrated just slightly too well, the stutter a fraction too consistent, the flinching a degree too practiced, the general air of a man held together by anxiety and the goodwill of people who found the anxiety endearing. Real anxiety was more variable. Real anxiety had good days and bad days and didn't maintain such an even frequency. After the turban, the performance got better in a way that made it worse. Quirrell seemed to find his footing, marginally. His eyes, which had been appropriately uncertain, started doing something else occasionally, a stillness behind the nervousness, a focusing, the specific quality of eyes that were measuring rather than reacting. Harry mentioned it to Griphook in his next letter, sandwiched between a question about his winter curriculum and a note about the quality of Hogwarts potion stores relative to Gringotts' apothecary. Griphook's reply was 3 lines, noted. Keep distance. Tell Ragnok directly. He wrote to Ragnok directly. December arrived and brought the end-of-term exams, which Harry approached the way he'd approached every assessment since age 6, with the understanding that demonstrating what you knew was a performance, and that performances had audiences, and that you chose what to show based on who was watching. He showed enough to be clearly excellent. Not enough to require explanation. Hermione showed everything, always, because her relationship with knowledge was fundamentally generous, she wanted to give it back, wanted to prove it was real. Harry found this genuinely admirable and occasionally tactically inconvenient. He'd stopped trying to moderate it after the second week and started factoring it in instead. Ron showed enough to not worry his mother, which was a strategy Harry considered deeply underrated. The exams themselves were unremarkable except for Flitwick's Charms Practical, in which Harry produced a Wingardium Leviosa that lifted the feather 6 feet off the desk and held it there with a steadiness that made Flitwick stop in the middle of the row and come back and look at it for a long moment. The control, Flitwick said, quietly, to himself as much as Harry. How are you producing that level of fine control? Goblin wandwork theory emphasizes precision over power, Harry said. Ironforge trained me on micro-applications before macro-applications. Flitwick looked at him with an expression that was half academic delight and half something more personal. Ironforge, he said softly. You trained with Ironforge? You know him? He's my third cousin, Flitwick said. And smiled, small and genuine, the smile of someone encountering an unexpected connection. Tell him Phileas says hello. In gobbledygook. He'll appreciate it. Harry liked Flitwick. He added him to the list of people at Hogwarts he trusted, which was carefully maintained and not very long. The night it actually happened was in December, 4 days before the winter break, and it started not with the third-floor corridor but with a chess game. Harry and Ron had been playing chess in the common room since October, and the progression of their games had been, Harry thought, one of the more interesting relationships he developed. Ron was the best chess player Harry had ever beaten, which was a more complex sentence than it appeared. Ron played with the intuitive brilliance of someone who experienced the board as a living thing, who saw patterns instead of calculating them, who made moves that looked like impulse and turned out, 5 turns later, to be devastating architecture. Harry calculated everything and still only won about 60% of their games, which was more unnerving than losing would have been. You're thinking too hard, Ron said, moving a knight in a way that made Harry immediately review the last 6 moves. That's your tell. Your face goes completely blank when you're thinking hard. Most people's faces go blank when they're not thinking. Yours goes blank when you are. That's useful information, Harry said, making a note to practice with a mirror. Don't practice it away, Ron said. It's sort of reassuring. Means you're actually in there somewhere. He moved a rook. Check. Harry examined the board. Got out of check in 2 moves and launched a counter that would take 4 moves to resolve. Can I ask you something? Sure. The stone. If it gets taken, if Voldemort gets a body, what does your family do? Ron's hand stilled over a bishop. He looked at the board. Dad and Mum were in the Order of the Phoenix, he said. Dumbledore's group, during the war. I don't know. Fight again, I suppose. He moved the bishop. Mum wouldn't want us involved. But you would be. Yeah. Simply, without drama. Yeah, of course. Wouldn't you? I already am, Harry said. That's why I'm asking about you. Ron looked at him. The firelight was doing something warm to the room, and outside it was deep winter, and the castle was very quiet. You're not going to wait for Dumbledore to handle it, Ron said. It wasn't a question. Dumbledore will handle the politics, Harry said. He's very good at politics. But the stone isn't a political problem. It's a physical one. If someone gets through the trapdoor, it needs to be managed. We're 11, Ron said, and then stopped, because he'd heard that argument made recently and he remembered how it had landed. Right. You keep saying that. I keep saying that because it's true, and true things need to be acknowledged before you decide to ignore them, Harry said. We're 11 and untrained and going up against someone who survived being blasted apart by a rebounding killing curse. I'm not pretending otherwise. But Dumbledore put that trap under a school, Harry said. Which means either he thinks it's unbreachable, which means he's miscalculated, or he expects it to be breached and he set something up that only a specific person can solve. He moved his queen. In which case, he's planned for a particular outcome. And I'm not willing to be part of someone else's planned outcome without understanding the plan first. Ron stared at the board for a while. Then he said, "What's actually under that trapdoor?" 7 obstacles, Harry said. Gringotts had partial intelligence on the enchantments from the professors who set them. Herbology, Devil's Snare. Flying Keys. Giant Chess Set. Troll, probably already neutralized from Halloween. Potions Logic Puzzle. Quirrell's Contribution, probably something directly linked to Voldemort's methods. He looked at Ron. And a mirror. A mirror? Erased. The Mirror of Erased. Shows you your deepest desire. Dumbledore built the actual retrieval mechanism into it, somehow. He watched Ron's expression. "You're good at chess." Ron looked at him. "That chess set, giant. Enchanted. Requires someone who can command the pieces strategically." Harry waited. "You planned this," Ron said. Not accusingly. With a kind of wondering recognition. "You've been, for how long?" "Since October," Harry said honestly. "I didn't plan you specifically. I just didn't plan around you." There was a difference, and Ron heard it. He looked at the board. He looked at Harry. He said, "If I get us through a giant chess set, you and I need to have a very serious conversation about whether you are allowed to make strategic decisions without telling me." "Agreed," Harry said. "And Hermione needs to know all of this." "She already knows most of it," Harry said. Ron threw a chess piece at him. Harry caught it. "Tomorrow," Harry said, "I'll show you both the report." They told Hermione the next morning in the corner of the library, and Hermione went through 3 distinct phases: the phase of absorbing the information, rapid, thorough, her pen moving in the margin of her own notes even though Harry hadn't told her she could make notes and she hadn't asked, the phase of wanting to argue with Harry's conclusions. She tried twice and stopped both times because the logic was sound and Hermione Granger did not argue with sound logic as a matter of principle. And the phase of practical objection. "We should tell a teacher," she said. "McGonagall. Or Flitwick." "Tell them what?" Harry said. "That we suspect Quirrell. We have a hypothesis, not evidence. McGonagall will refer it to Dumbledore. Dumbledore already knows there's a threat, he built the protections. Going to him means giving him control of the timeline. But he's the headmaster," Hermione said, with the specific tension of someone who had structured their understanding of institutions on the principle that authority existed to be trusted. "He's also the person who left me in a cupboard for 4 years because it was convenient for his plan," Harry said, very gently. "I don't think he's malicious. I think he's certain. And certain people manage situations toward their preferred outcomes without always checking whether the people inside the situation agree." Hermione was quiet. This was the argument she hadn't been ready for in October, and it had been becoming less comfortable to resist since then. She looked at her notes. "The potions puzzle," she said, at last. "Yes? Logic puzzle, you said. Not magic, logic. I can do that." She said it flatly. Not showing off. Just measuring her own toolkit. "And the Devil's Snare, herbology, fire or light will neutralize it. Neville could tell us more if we needed detail." "We're not bringing Neville," Harry said. "I know. I'm just saying I know the relevant information." She looked up. "And the keys, flying keys, probably on broomstick," Harry said. "I can fly." This was a significant understatement. Goblin aerial training had started at age 7 on a training broom and Harry had been good at it within 2 weeks in the specific way that made his instructor say, "Don't show this to anyone until you know why it matters." "And the mirror," Hermione said. "The Mirror of Erased. You can't get the stone from it unless, how does the mechanism work?" "I don't know exactly," Harry admitted. "That's the piece I don't have." He turned the ring on his finger. But the mirror shows you what you want most. Dumbledore built it so the stone could only be retrieved by someone who wanted to find it without using it. The library was very quiet around them. Someone who didn't want to use it, Hermione said slowly. Not to make gold. Not to make themselves immortal. Someone who just wanted to keep it safe. She looked at Harry. That's designed for you. It's designed for a specific type of person, Harry said. Whether it's me specifically or whether Dumbledore wrote it for himself as a safeguard, I'm not sure. It doesn't matter, Ron said, and they both looked at him because he'd been quiet and thinking the way he went quiet and thinking when the chess part of his brain was running a problem. What matters is whether we can get through everything before the mirror. Because if Quirrell's already in the corridor, he hasn't moved yet, Harry said. But he's getting ready to. The turban's been different this week. Ron frowned. The turban? More weight to it. Not much. But more than a piece of cloth. Harry said it matter-of-factly. Something's changed. Hermione and Ron stared at him. I notice things, Harry said, slightly defensively. You notice everything, Ron said. It's useful. Also slightly alarming. Do you notice everything about us? Do you want me to answer that? No, Ron said immediately. Absolutely not. 2 days before the winter break, on a Thursday night when the castle had gone quiet and the snow was coming down thick against the windows, Harry woke up at 2 in the morning with the particular clarity of someone whose subconscious has finished a calculation. He lay in the dark of the dormitory listening to the sleeping sounds of 4 other boys, and he turned over the problem of Quirrell, not the what but the when. The corridor, the dog, the 7 obstacles. The stone at the end of it. Whatever was living on the back of Quirrell's head under that turban, hungry and growing less patient. Something had changed in the last week. The timing was shifting. He could feel it in the same way he could feel an opponent's balance change in a sparring session, the subtle forward lean that meant they were about to commit. He got up quietly, dressed in the dark, black, simple, the combat practical clothes Blood Axe had insisted he bring, and went down to the common room. He expected it to be empty. It wasn't. Hermione was sitting by the dying fire with the standard book of spells, grade 1 in her lap and the expression of someone who had also lain awake doing calculations. She looked up when he came down and said nothing for a moment. You feel it too, she said. Not a question. Something's moving, Harry said. I don't know exactly when. Before Christmas, she said. The school will be mostly empty before Christmas. Less chance of witnesses. Less chance of interference. She closed the book. Harry, if something happens over the break, you're staying, aren't you? Yes. So are we, she said. Hermione, Ron already decided, she said. He told me this morning. He's staying. His parents think it's because he wants extra Quidditch practice. She met his eyes directly. Don't tell us we can't. You said we're in this. We're in it. Harry looked at her in the firelight, this girl with her enormous competence and her genuine courage and her very recently reconstructed relationship with the idea of institutional authority, and he thought about Neville saying plants are easier than people and what it meant that Hermione was here at 2 in the morning because she'd done the same calculation he had. I'm not going to tell you can't, he said. I never was. She breathed, visibly. Good. I need you to write to my father, Harry said. Tomorrow. Not in code, a plain letter, because plain letters from students don't attract monitoring the way coded institutional post does. Tell him the timeline has moved. Tell him the intermediary we suspect has changed in the last week. Tell him we're watching and will send immediate word if it activates. Hermione looked at him carefully. You're still telling Ragnok everything. Always, Harry said. I don't make independent moves without his knowledge. That's not the arrangement. What is the arrangement? Harry was quiet for a moment. He adopted me, he said. Not as a political piece. As a son. And sons tell their parents what's happening even when, especially when, things are dangerous. He looked at the fire. He'll want to move. He'll want to send people. I'll have to tell him not to, because sending goblin warriors into Hogwarts is the kind of thing that becomes its own problem. But he needs to know. Hermione absorbed this. You're protecting him from doing something that would cost him politically. I'm being a son, Harry said, simply. She stared at him for another moment. Then she opened her book again, took out her quill, turned to a blank page at the back, and said, "Tell me exactly what to write." The letter reached Ragnok the next morning. His reply came in 4 hours, which for sealed institutional post was extraordinarily fast and represented, Harry knew, the deployment of the fastest goblin courier network in Britain. The reply was 3 lines. Confirmed. Watching from this end. There are things beneath that school that belong to us by treaty that predate Hogwarts by 4 centuries. Remember your training. Remember who you are. Come home when it's done. Harry folded the letter and held it for a moment. Ron was reading over his shoulder with the easy comfort of someone who'd stopped asking permission to do that 2 months ago. Hermione was watching Harry's face. What does he mean, things that belong to them by treaty? Ron asked. The deep foundations of Hogwarts were built on goblin-registered land, Harry said. The goblins ceded it in 993 with specific reservations about mineral rights and access to the underground water systems. He paused. Which means technically, every time Hogwarts runs water, there's a treaty clause activated. Ron blinked. How is any of this? How does anyone know how to function in this world when everything has 600 years of legal complexity underneath it? They don't, mostly, Harry said. That's rather the point. Quirrell moved on the 14th of December. Harry knew because the ring on his finger went warm at 11:30 on a Thursday night, not the aggressive heat of a forced removal but the monitoring alert that Goldtusk had embedded in it at Ragnok's instruction, keyed to respond to specific categories of dark magic signature operating within Hogwarts walls. He was already dressed. He woke Ron with a hand on his shoulder and found Hermione awake in the common room, already had been for an hour, sitting with her wand in her hand and the Devil's Snare counter-protocol written on her palm in ink. Now, she said. Now, Harry said. The corridors were empty. The castle breathed around them, slow and deep, its living architecture for once absolutely still, as if it too was holding its breath. Harry moved them through the 3rd floor with his memory of the building's layout and illumos kept close, minimal light, moving fast, no discussion. They'd discussed everything already. There was nothing left to say. The door was open. Not broken open, opened, with a key or a spell, cleanly, which told Harry that Quirrell had been here before to study it. The dog beyond was asleep, heavily, the sleep of an enchantment rather than natural rest. Harry stepped over it first. Ron went second. Hermione last, and she didn't let herself look at the dog's 3 heads because looking would slow her down and she'd decided not to slow down. The trapdoor. The drop into darkness. The fall landing in something that grabbed. Don't move, Hermione said immediately, her voice sharp and controlled. It's Devil's Snare. Relax, don't struggle, she was already pulling out her wand, already casting, the bright fire blooming blue-white around them, and the plant recoiled in a way that was almost offended, releasing them as the light drove it back. They landed properly on the floor. Harry was moving before the light faded. The next chamber, the birds, or keys, he'd thought birds but it was keys, hundreds of them, swarming like a flock of bright panic things under the ceiling. 1 broomstick. The door on the other side locked, the right key somewhere in the storm of wrong ones. He was on the broom before Hermione finished cataloging. He went up and the keys scattered and he held still, very still, the broom hovering, and he looked at them, not chasing, just watching, because Bloodaxe's voice was in his head saying the enemy doesn't stop but you choose when to start, and the right key would have a bent wing, something distinctive, something that made it the one that actually fit, there. Silver-winged, bent left side, moving faster than the others, moving erratically the way old magic moved when it recognized someone trying to find it. He went for it. What followed was 40 seconds of the most demanding flying Harry had done outside of deliberate training. The key was fast, genuinely fast, and intelligent in the specific terrible way that enchanted objects were intelligent, and it dove and turned and used the other keys as cover. And Harry's broom was a school broom with all the handling of a determined shopping trolley, but he had 6 years of the best goblin aerial training and he knew how to make bad tools perform. He caught it. The key shrieked. The door opened. He dropped off the broom and they went through. The chess set. It was vast in the way that things underground were vast, larger than the room suggested, the ceiling lost in shadow, the pieces standing silent and enormous and armed. A chessboard laid across the stone in alternating dark and pale squares, and at the far end their sides pieces stood waiting, and 3 of them were missing. Ron walked to the center and stood and looked at the board with his head slightly tilted, and went still in the specific way he went still when he was reading a game. Harry and Hermione watched him. After 30 seconds Ron said, "This is very good." He said it with the tone of someone encountering a professional-grade opponent. Whoever set this played seriously. He moved to the knight. "You're taking bishop," he said to Harry. "Hermione, you're queen, but you stay back, don't move unless I tell you." "I don't know how to," Hermione started. "You won't need to know," Ron said. "I'll tell you exactly where to go." He looked at the board once more. The pieces were beginning to stir, their stone surfaces grinding, turning toward the intruders. "This is going to be a very short game," Ron said, which Harry understood not as confidence but as warning. It was 9 moves. Harry had played Ron 100 times and he knew Ron's chess voice, the calm authority of it, the way he spoke to his pieces and Harry and Hermione with the same level directness, no wasted words, no second-guessing. The enchanted pieces responded to Ron the way all chess pieces responded to Ron, which was to say they responded as if he were something they'd been waiting for, a conductor finding a particular orchestra. On the 7th move a black castle came for Ron directly. Harry moved before he'd decided to move, that was the training, the part Bloodaxe had beaten in past the thinking layer, stepping sideways, getting a shoulder in front, taking the hit that was meant for Ron and going down hard on the stone floor. He was up in 2 seconds. The pain was real, the enchanted piece was solid stone and it had moved with real force, and his left arm registered it, the dull fire of a deep bruise or possibly something worse. "Harry," Hermione said. "Fine," he said, because he was, mostly, and there were 2 moves left. Ron finished the game on his next move. The Black King dropped his crown. The pieces went still. The door on the far side ground open, and the 3 of them stood there breathing in the sudden silence, the fallen chess pieces huge and motionless around them. "Your arm," Hermione said. "I know. Keep moving." He flexed his fingers. It moved. Not broken. What happened to the troll? The next chamber answered the question. Troll, knocked out cold, smelling very bad, pre-existing damage consistent with a struggle that had happened earlier in the night. Quarrel had been thorough. Then the potion room. A line of 7 bottles on a table, with a rolled-up parchment beside them, and the door ahead burning with purple-black flame and the door behind them now blocked with similar fire in orange. Harry picked up the parchment. "Read it." Passed it to Hermione. She read it in 14 seconds. He watched her count bottles, look at the flame, count again, cross-reference something in her head. 20 seconds total. "Smallest bottle," she said. "On the right." "You're sure?" "It's a logic puzzle," she said, in the tone she used when something was within her purview and she'd verified it 3 times in her head. "Yes. I'm sure." Harry picked up the smallest bottle on the right. He looked at it. He looked at the door. He looked at Ron. Go back, Harry said. Ron's jaw set immediately. Harry, the door behind us will still have the counter potion, the freezing flame. Hermione knows which one. He kept his voice level. You can get back. You can get out. You can send for help, send for Ragnok, specifically, Ledger knows the emergency return route. He held Ron's eyes. I'm not doing this alone because I want to be a hero. I'm doing it alone because there's only enough potion for one person and someone needs to go back and make sure the message gets out. Ron looked like he wanted to argue. He was, in the architecture of himself, someone who walked toward problems rather than away from them. But he was also, fundamentally, someone who could recognize when the logic was correct even when it hurt. If you die, Ron said, I will be extremely angry. Noted, Harry said. He looked at Hermione. She was holding herself very still, very controlled, the expression of someone who had accepted that control was what they had and they were going to use it completely. Tell my father what happened, Harry said. Exactly as it happened. Don't soften anything. I will, she said. And Hermione, he paused. The thing about trust not always requiring justification. I trust you. Both of you. He looked between them. I just wanted to say that before, in case. Hermione pressed her lips together. Come back, she said. He drank the potion. The cold hit immediately, spreading from his chest outward, the specific deep cold of very old magic doing something deliberate to the body. He pushed through the black flame and it parted around him and didn't burn. On the other side was the last room. And in it, standing in front of the mirror of Ariste, was not Snape. It was Quirrell. And in the glass of the mirror, Harry could already see the reflection, Quirrell's face, distorted by the mirror's own logic, the face beneath the surface of the face, the thing living behind the professor's eyes that was not Professor Quirrell at all. He stood in the doorway of the last room, his arm aching from the chess piece, the cold of the potion still moving through him, and he looked at the mirror and then at the man and then at the mirror again. Harry Potter, said Quirrell. The stutter was entirely gone. How unexpected. Behind Harry, through the wall, very faint, the sound of Ron and Hermione retreating. Good. That was good. He stepped into the room, and let the door close behind him, and was alone with the dark. Chapter 5, Blood Calls to Blood. Summer came to Gringotts the way it always did, sideways, barely noticed, the temperature outside the bank's doors a different world from the constant cool of the stone corridors below. Harry arrived home on the 1st of July and spent the first 3 days doing nothing in particular, which was something Ragnok had built into the post-term schedule after he'd noticed, 2 years ago, that Harry came back from Hogwarts' wound slightly too tight and needed decompression time before anything useful could happen. Harry spent the 3 days eating properly, sleeping long hours, and sitting in the deep office playing chess with Ragnok, losing at a rate that suggested he'd been distracted during term and needed recalibration. You're playing like someone who's thinking about 3 other things, Ragnok said, on the second evening. I am thinking about 3 other things, Harry said. Then think about them first and play chess after. Harry set down his bishop. Voldemort, he said. That was the first thing. He's rebuilding. I don't know how or where, but the shade that came out of Quirrell wasn't the end, it was barely a setback. He's been surviving for 10 years in whatever form that was. He'll find another way. Yes, Ragnok said. The inquiry, Harry said. That was the second thing. The Ministry responded to the formal filing with a procedural delay request. They've already asked for 3 extensions. Goldtusk is managing it, Ragnok said. The delay requests are expected. Each one costs Dumbledore political capital because the press is watching the clock. The Daily Prophet ran the initial story in January and they'll run follow-ups each time an extension is granted. He moved his bishop. This is how institutional accountability works. Slowly, then suddenly. Harry nodded. Third thing, he said, is the prophecy. Ragnok went still. Not dramatically, he never did anything dramatically, just a quality of attention that changed, the way a room's atmosphere changed when someone walked in who knew something everyone else didn't. He looked at Harry steadily. Dumbledore told you, he said. After Christmas, Harry said. He said he'd promised honesty. He kept it. Harry looked at the chess board. There's a prophecy. From before I was born. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born as the 7th month dies. The full version is in the Department of Mysteries, but Dumbledore knows it. He's known since before Voldemort marked me. Yes, Ragnok said again. Harry looked up sharply. You knew. I knew there was a prophecy, Ragnok said. I did not know the specific content. Dumbledore kept that closely. But I knew it existed because the circumstances of your survival were too specific to be accidental. Voldemort does not make tactical errors. The fact that he came for you personally, a toddler, on the word of something, that required a source of information beyond ordinary intelligence. He paused. What was your response when he told you? I asked him if he thought it was deterministic, Harry said. He said he thought prophecy created the conditions for its own fulfillment, that the Dark Lord having heard it was what made you the one it described, because his actions in response to it marked you. That you weren't born the one. You became the one because he believed it. An interesting theological position, Ragnok said. It's also a useful one, Harry said. Because it means the prophecy doesn't control the outcome, the choices do. And I get to make choices. He was quiet for a moment. It says one must kill the other. That neither can live while the other survives. Ragnok said nothing for a while. Outside the office, the bank moved and breathed, the sound of it so familiar by now that Harry heard it the way he heard his own heartbeat, only in the moments when things were very quiet. I am not going to tell you, Ragnok said at last, that the prophecy is irrelevant. That would not be honest. He picked up his queen, held it. I am going to tell you that the prophecy is not a plan. It is a constraint. Within constraints, choices remain. He set the queen down. You are not a sacrifice. You will not be managed toward a death that someone else has decided is necessary. Whatever this requires, whatever it costs, it will be decided by you, with full information, when the time comes. What if the time comes before I'm ready? Harry asked. You will be ready, Ragnok said, with the absolute certainty of someone who has been watching a person become something for 6 years. Not because of the prophecy. Because of who you are. Harry looked at the chess board for a while. Checkmate in 4 moves, he said. Ragnok looked. He looked for a while. Yes, he said, with the careful dignity of someone who had been outplayed. Yes, I believe that's correct. Harry moved his knight. I'm going to need more advanced training this summer. I've already arranged it, Ragnok said. Blood Axe has a new program. She called it, in gobbledygook, something that roughly translates to the part we didn't teach you because you were too young and now you're not. That's not a reassuring name. It wasn't meant to be. The training program Blood Axe had designed for the summer was called, in the internal Gringotts documentation, Advanced Integrated Combat, and it was the most comprehensive and exhausting thing Harry had done since learning to read 3 languages simultaneously at age 8. It ran 6 days a week, 5 hours a day, and covered 4 distinct areas in rotation. The first was wandless magic, not the rough accidental wandless work Harry could already do in high-stress situations, but controlled, deliberate, precise wandless application of intermediate spells. The second was combined combat, wand and body simultaneously, the seamless integration of magical and physical response that most wizarding duelers never developed because the standard curriculum treated them as separate disciplines. The third was resistance training, specifically, resistance to mind-altering magic, legilimency, compulsion charms, and anything else that worked on the inside of a person's head rather than the outside. The fourth was what Bloodaxe called reading the room, which was not a formal magical discipline at all but a systematic training of the attention, how to process a space, multiple threats, incomplete information, and emotional pressure simultaneously while maintaining decision quality. "You already do this naturally," Bloodaxe said, on the first morning, standing in the training room with her arms folded and her expression communicating that natural ability was the beginning of competence, not the end of it. "You did it at age 4 when you looked at Sharpclaw and decided he was safe. You did it last December when you read Quirrell's body language and separated it from Voldemort's communication patterns." She paused. "Natural instinct has a ceiling. Trained instinct does not." "How high does the ceiling go?" Harry asked. Bloodaxe looked at him. "Higher than you'll need," she said. "But we're going to find out." The first week nearly broke him. Not physically. Physically he'd been working at a high level for 4 years and his body was more capable than it looked, which was a deliberate result of training with goblins who valued functional strength over visual bulk. It was the mental load. The simultaneous tracking of 5 variables across multiple senses while maintaining magical output while reading an opponent's micro-expressions while keeping his own face a blank ledger while staying genuinely loose and present rather than rigidly controlled was, it turned out, an order of magnitude more difficult than doing any one of those things separately. He made every mistake available to him in the first week, and Bloodaxe noted each one without judgment and without mercy, which he found more useful than either sympathy or cruelty. By the 3rd week he was starting to feel the shape of it, the specific expanded awareness that came when all the separate channels of attention stopped competing and started running in parallel, a kind of cognitive harmony that felt less like thinking hard and more like listening well. Griphook watched one of the late July sessions from the observation gallery above the training room, and afterward came down and said, "You're different." "How?" Harry asked, catching his breath. "You used to watch your opponents," Griphook said. "Now you watch the space." He tilted his head. "It's difficult to explain. The quality of your attention has changed. It's wider." "Bloodaxe calls it receiving rather than seeking," Harry said. "Most people scan for threats. They go looking. She says you miss things when you go looking because you're filtering for what you expect to find." He sat down. "If you receive instead, just open the channel and let everything in, you catch things at the edge. The unexpected things. The things that actually kill you," Griphook said. "That's what she said. Almost word for word." Griphook was quiet for a moment, watching the now empty training floor below them. "The inquiry moved again," he said. "The 3rd delay request was denied. The Wiesengemot has scheduled the formal hearing for November." "November," Harry said. "It will run through the winter term," Griphook said. "You'll be at Hogwarts." "I know. Goldtusk briefed me on the witness list. I'm not scheduled to testify until the 2nd phase, which won't be until after Christmas at the earliest." He looked at Griphook. "How is Dumbledore handling it?" "With considerable grace," Griphook said, and the tone was the specific tone he used when he was giving credit for something he found politically inconvenient to admire. "He has made no attempt to obstruct or delay. He submitted his own documentation proactively. He wrote to Ragnok twice. Both letters were measured, honest, and did not attempt to minimize." He paused. "Your father says the man is genuinely trying to reckon with it." "I know," Harry said. "We've been corresponding." Griphook turned to look at him. "Since February," Harry said. "He writes, I write back. We've mostly been talking about my parents." He looked at his hands, the faint silvery marks from last December's burn still just visible at the edges of his palms. He knew them well. "He tells me things about them that aren't in any books. My mother's sense of humor. My father's absolute inability to be subtle even when subtlety was clearly what the situation required." Griphook said nothing for a moment. Then, "Is this strategic?" "Partly," Harry said honestly. He's the most knowledgeable person alive on the subject of Voldemort, and I'm eventually going to have to deal with Voldemort, so keeping that channel open is strategically sensible. He paused. But also he knew my parents. And he stopped. Started again. I have Ragnok. I don't need a father. But knowing who Lily and James were from someone who loved them, that's not strategy. That's just something I want. Griphook made a small sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite dismissal. Your mother wrote Goblin contract law briefs for Gringotts during her last 2 years, he said. Harry turned sharply. What? She was excellent, Griphook said, with the flat simplicity of genuine professional respect. Ragnok did not tell you because he was waiting for the right time. I am telling you now because I am less patient than he is, and the right time appears to be when you are sweaty in a training room and not braced for it. He turned back to the observation window. She argued with Goldtusk constantly. He considered her the best external intellect he'd worked with in 30 years. Harry sat with that for a while. She would have hated the situation with the Dursleys, he said. She would have been incandescent, Griphook said, which was the most emotional language he used in ordinary conversation. Which is why Ragnok authorized the oath without significant internal debate. Because he knew that Lily Potter, who had briefed Goblin contracts in this building, whose son was in our files as a client since birth, had been failed by this institution as much as by Dumbledore. You owed her, Harry said. We owed her, Griphook said. Yes. Harry looked at the training floor below. The light stones on the walls burned steady gold, the same light they'd burned for 3 centuries, patient and permanent. Tell me more about her, he said. Griphook, who was not a storyteller by nature or preference, nonetheless sat down beside him and told him about Lily Potter, the way she'd read contracts, the arguments she'd picked, the specific frequency and quality of her laugh, the way she'd brought James in once and James had tried to engage Goldtusk in a conversation about Quidditch that had gone poorly for everyone involved. He told it in the flat factual register he used for everything, and it was, somehow, all the more vivid for that, not a story shaped by sentiment but a report on an actual person, someone who had existed and been specific and left a trace in the Goblin's institutional memory that 6 years of absence hadn't erased. Harry listened to all of it. September brought Hogwarts back, and Hogwarts had changed in the way that things changed when something large had moved through them, not on the surface, but in the pressure. The inquiry was public knowledge now, had been since January, and the school had spent 6 months deciding what to feel about it. The Gryffindors, broadly, had landed on protective. The Hufflepuffs, broadly, had landed on fair. They thought the inquiry was just, and they thought Dumbledore should cooperate, and they thought Harry Potter probably deserved better than a cupboard, all of these positions held simultaneously and without contradiction, which Harry found deeply characteristic. The Ravenclaws had opinions about the legal procedures and were mostly arguing about those rather than the substance. The Slytherins were more complicated. Harry had expected hostility from Slytherin as a baseline and had received it in first year from the expected sources, a general atmosphere of cold assessment, Draco Malfoy's careful public performance of disdain that Harry had long since identified as a performance. What was new in second year was a subcurrent of something different. Not warmth, but attention. The specific attention of people who were very good at reading power structures and were revising their calculations. Draco himself had been revising for the entire summer, apparently. He found Harry on the second day, on the moving staircases, while they were both going up and the stairs chose to swing sideways in a way that put them on the same landing. He looked at Harry with the expression he'd been slowly developing since the train in first year, the expression of someone who had been taught one set of scripts for dealing with the world and was discovering, with increasing frequency, that the scripts didn't fit. The inquiry, Draco said. Yes, Harry said. My father is watching it closely. He said it with the careful neutrality of someone sharing information without committing to a position on it. He says it's the most significant institutional challenge to Dumbledore's authority since the First Voldemort War. Your father is not wrong, Harry said. He also says Ragnok is playing a longer game than the inquiry itself. Draco's grey eyes were measuring. That it's not about Dumbledore specifically. It's about establishing legal precedent for Goblin institutional standing in ministry affairs. Your father, Harry said, is very perceptive. He'd like to meet with you, Draco said. Harry looked at him. Draco looked back, and beneath the Malfoy composure something genuinely anxious was visible, not for himself but about the ask, about whether it would land wrong, about whether he'd miscalculated the conversation. It was, Harry thought, the most honest expression he'd seen on Draco's face. Not yet, Harry said. Tell your father I'll meet him when the inquiry has completed its first phase. Not before. Why? Because his interest in me changes depending on what the inquiry does, Harry said. And I'd rather know who I'm meeting before I meet them. A pause. Then Draco said, almost involuntarily, that's very Goblin. That's very sensible, Harry said. They're often the same thing. He started moving again. I'll let you know when the timing is right. And if I told my father you said that? I'd expect you to tell your father I said that, Harry said, over his shoulder. That's why I said it that way. He heard Draco make a sound behind him that was approximately the sound of someone finding something both irritating and funny and not being sure which response was appropriate. Second year's defense against the dark arts professor was a man named Gilderoy Lockhart, who arrived at Hogwarts trailing a cloud of extremely good publicity and the specific brand of confidence that came from having told a story so many times that the distinction between the story and the memory had become navigable. Harry sat through the first class and catalogued him in about 6 minutes. Not a fraud exactly, or not only a fraud. A person of genuine charm and average magical ability who had developed, over years, an extraordinary talent for arriving after the interesting part and then writing about it as though he'd been at the center. The books were real events, just real events that had happened to other people, with Lockhart's name applied to them after the fact like a coat of paint. The specific tell was the eyes. Lockhart's eyes, when he was being watched, were performing confidence, expansive, warm, direct with the performative directness of someone who had studied directness rather than grown it. When no one was looking, they were busy, calculating, tracking the room. Harry found him interesting the way you found a complicated social problem interesting, not enjoyable but genuinely engaging. Ron found him immediately and comprehensively insufferable, which Harry found refreshing. The man has signed his own photo in the inside cover of every textbook, Ron said, at dinner on the first day, with the eloquent disgust of someone whose family valued functional competence over performance. Every single one. It's very thorough, Hermione said, in the tone she used when she found something defensible but was aware the defense wasn't strong. You thought he was wonderful in August, Ron said. I've updated my assessment, Hermione said. He's technically proficient and extremely strategic about personal branding. That's a very polite way of saying, Ron, Harry said, mildly. He's a fraud, Ron said. A very shiny fraud. Partly, Harry said. The things in the books happened. He just wasn't the one who did them. He buttered his bread. More importantly, he's completely useless as a defense professor, which is a problem given that we have an ongoing Voldemort situation. Can we not call it the ongoing Voldemort situation, Ron said. Would you prefer the Dark Lord problem? I'd prefer no problem. That option closed in 1981, Harry said. Hermione was watching him with the look she'd been developing since first year, the one that meant she had noticed something and was deciding how to frame the question. You've been different since summer, she said. The training program, Harry said. How different, she asked. He thought about how to answer that. Blood Axe says I was watching before, he said. Now I'm receiving. It's harder to explain than it is to feel. The information just comes in without me having to go get it. She looked at the hall. Like what? Seamus Finnegan has a fight at home that he hasn't talked to anyone about. He's been holding his shoulders differently since the train. Neville is more confident about something specific, probably herbology-related, probably Professor Sprout said something encouraging. The Slytherin second years near the end of that table are nervous about something institutional, not school, outside school, probably the inquiry fallout hitting their families. He paused. Lockhart has looked at me 4 times in the last 10 minutes and each time he looked away before I could catch him looking, which means he's building up to something. Hermione stared at him. Ron had paused mid-bite. What? Harry said. Nothing, Ron said. You're just. You know. A bit alarming, Hermione supplied. I was going to say impressive, Ron said. Both, said Hermione. Harry looked at the Slytherin table. The nervous second years. He thought about the inquiry, and about Lucius Malfoy watching it closely, and about the autumn pressure building in the wizarding world like weather before a storm. Voldemort diminished but not finished, rebuilding at whatever pace rebuilding was possible when you were a shade without a body. Something was going to happen this year. He couldn't see the shape of it yet, but the receiving that blood axe had trained in him caught the pressure of it the way skin caught the pressure of wind before rain. He filed it. Kept eating. October brought the first session of the Wisengamot hearing, and it brought Ragnok to London. Not in person at Hogwarts, the hearing was in the Ministry, and Harry was at school, and Ragnok was in the courtroom being cross-examined by Ministry counsel with the specific patient composure of someone who had been preparing to have this conversation for 7 years and found it, now that it was happening, rather less difficult than the preparation. Harry got the daily briefings from Griphook by Owl, written in the flat precise style that Griphook used for everything, and read them in the corner of the library with the focused attention he brought to ledgers and legal filings. The first day of testimony established the basic timeline, Harry's placement with the Dursleys, the ward design, the absence of welfare checks. The Ministry Council had tried to establish reasonable disagreement on the ward specifications, and Goldtusk had introduced the external ward analyst assessment, and the 3 signatures on that document had been enough to close that particular avenue of argument. The second day covered the Gringotts team's arrival at Privet Drive in 1985. Sharpclaw testified. The condition report, all 62 pages, was entered into evidence. On the third day, the Ministry Council had tried a different strategy, the context of war, the extreme pressure of the period, the reasonable belief that any environment was better than direct exposure to Voldemort's followers. Ragnok had let the argument run for its full allotted time and then, when it was finished, had read into the record the specific clauses of the 1872 Child Protection Statutes that made no exception for wartime context. The Daily Prophet was running at front page every day. Dad says the Wisengamot chamber has been standing room only, Ron wrote, in his October letter. Ron had started writing home about Harry's situation with the careful, slightly formal tone of someone who understood that what he was writing was going into his family's understanding of something important. Arthur Weasley's replies had been, according to Ron, increasingly supportive, which was its own data point about how the inquiry was landing in Ministry circles. What Harry was watching for, between the briefings and the letters, was the secondary effects. The shifts in power. The small dominoes that started moving when a large structure began its controlled descent. He noticed it first in the staff room dynamic, not something he'd normally have access to, but McGonagall had a habit of continuing conversations in low voices when she thought the corridor was empty, and Harry had spent 6 years being trained to be very quiet. He heard, over 2 weeks in October, a shift in her tone when she spoke about Dumbledore, still respectful, still professional, but with a new quality of independent assessment, of a woman who had been loyal to an institution recalibrating how much of her loyalty had been to the institution and how much to the man. He noticed it in Dumbledore himself, most clearly. The headmaster moved through the school in October with the same warmth and competence as always, managed the daily business with his characteristic grace, and was, Harry could see it clearly now, with Bloodaxe training running, carrying something heavier than he usually carried. Not guilt exactly. Something more like reckoning. The specific weight of a person who has been genuinely good at many things for a very long time and is discovering that goodness and rightness are not the same category and that the gap between them has been, in certain specific instances, wide enough to be catastrophic. Harry wrote to him in October. Not about the inquiry, about his mother's work for Gringotts, which Griphook had told him about, and which he'd been thinking about since summer. He asked if Dumbledore had known about it. The reply came back in 2 days, 3 pages, and it contained more than Harry had expected, not just the Gringotts work but the full picture of Lily Evans at 17, 18, 20, the person she was becoming before the war compressed everything. Dumbledore wrote about her with precision and genuine love, the love of a teacher for a student who had exceeded not just his expectations but his ability to categorize, and Harry read those 3 pages in his bed in the dark with his wand light and felt something happen in his chest that was grief and gratitude simultaneously, the specific ache of loving someone you never knew. He wrote back. He kept writing back. The chamber was opened in November. It started with Mrs. Norris, petrified in a spreading pool of water on Halloween night, and the writing on the wall above her, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware," and the particular coldness that settled over Hogwarts when something old and sleeping woke up in its walls. Harry stood in the corridor with Ron and Hermione and looked at the writing and felt the receiving open up, taking everything in, the crowd noise behind them, Filch's face when he arrived and saw his cat, the quality of silence from the walls themselves, which was different from the normal silence of the castle. A deeper silence. A listening silence. Something was in the walls. "Parseltongue," he said, very quietly, to Ron and Hermione. Ron glanced at him. "What?" "Parseltongue," Harry said again. "The ability to speak to snakes. I've had it since I was, well, always, I think. I didn't know what it was until Goldtusk told me." He kept his voice low, the crowd noise covering them. "There's something in the walls. Moving." Hermione had gone very still. "How do you know?" "Because it's talking," Harry said. "To itself, or, not to me. Through the walls. I can hear it." He looked at the ceiling, the stones. "It's very old. And very angry." Hermione's eyes were doing the rapid calculation thing. "The Chamber of Secrets," she said. "Salazar Slytherin. The legend says he left a creature in the castle. Something only his heir could control." She was already reaching, in her mind, for the relevant books. "A monster. The monster of Slytherin." "What kind of monster?" Ron said. "I don't know yet," Harry said. "But it petrified a cat through indirect contact. It's using the pipe system, the water, the walls. It goes everywhere the pipes go." He paused. "Which means it can reach everywhere. We need to find out what it is," Hermione said, with the decisive tone she used when she had a plan forming at speed. "Before it reaches anything bigger than a cat." Harry looked at the writing on the wall. "Enemies of the air. Someone opened the chamber," he said. "Someone who can speak to the thing inside, or control it, or someone with access to Slytherin's lineage." He thought about this. Voldemort was in the school last year. A shade, hosted in Quirrell. Is there anything left? "The diary," Hermione said, and it landed with the thud of a relevant fact hitting at the right moment. "What diary?" "I've been reading," she said, which was not a sentence that surprised anyone. "About Slytherin artifacts, about dark objects that can hold fragments of, if Voldemort created a vessel, some kind of object that carries part of himself, a diary could do it. A physical object that was opened in the school, that was given to," she stopped. "Someone has it. Someone's been writing in it." Harry thought about the attack, and the pipe system, and the voice in the walls. Who's been acting differently since September? They looked at each other. "Ginny Weasley," Ron said, and the words came out with the flat horror of someone whose protective instinct and analytical brain had just produced the same answer. What followed was 3 weeks of the most intensive cross-discipline research Harry had done outside of formal tutoring, conducted in the evenings in their library corner with books from the restricted section. Hermione had the passwords from a second-year project that had technically required McGonagall's counter-signature, which Hermione had technically obtained, and the technically was doing significant work, and in Harry's case supplemented by emergency correspondence with Goldtusk, who had access to the most comprehensive dark artifact registry in Britain. The basilisk answer came from Hermione, during a herbology double period on a Wednesday, when she was supposed to be repotting mandrakes and instead had a book hidden under her workbench and looked up suddenly with the expression she wore when something clicked. She wrote it on a piece of parchment and showed it to Harry under the bench. Basilisk. Giant serpent. Kills with direct eye contact. Petrification from indirect contact, reflection, water, camera, ghost. Can move through pipes. Parseltongue control. Can live for centuries. Below it, in smaller letters, the crowing of a rooster is fatal to it. Harry read it. Nodded once. Wrote beneath her note, fluent Parseltongue. Working on the rest. She read his addition. Looked at him. Wrote, chamber is somewhere deep in the school. Probably under the dungeons given the pipe access. He wrote, entrance likely in a girl's bathroom. 2nd floor. She stared at that for a moment. Then wrote, how do you know? He wrote, the voice goes down through the east wing. I've been tracking it for 2 weeks. She pressed her lips together, which was the expression she made when she'd been out-researched by someone with a different toolset. She didn't write anything back. She went back to her mandrakes. He'd been tracking the voice since Halloween. It moved at night mostly, a low sibilant sound running through the walls that Harry caught the way he caught everything now, not by going looking but by receiving. He couldn't understand everything it said. It was old Parseltongue, archaic, some of the words different from what Goldtusk had taught him. But he understood the intent. The anger. The hunger, the specific hunger of something very old that had been sleeping for 50 years and was awake and purposeful. Find them, it said, sometimes. Cleanse. He had not told Ron and Hermione the full content of what he was hearing, because hearing the specific thoughts of a 50-year-old dark creature moving through a school's walls was not information he wanted circulating. He told Ragnok everything, in letters he wrote alone late at night and sent before dawn. Ragnok's replies were characteristically direct and extraordinarily useful. The basilisk history, goblin encounters with basilisks over the centuries, the specific vulnerabilities, the lore around Parseltongue control and how it worked, whether a commanding Parseltongue could override a controlling one. The answer to the last question was, it depends on proximity and strength of connection. The original controller, Slytherin, or Slytherin's vessel currently operating through the diary, had the initial connection. A powerful independent Parseltongue speaker could challenge that, given direct contact. Harry read that twice. Then he wrote back, define powerful. Ragnok wrote back, you. Ginny Weasley disappeared on the 2nd of December. The note she'd left, not written by her, written in it, in the blank flat script of something that had used her hand and meant nothing by it, said only, her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. It was found at 8 in the morning by Ron, who had gone to her room when she didn't come to breakfast, and who came into the Great Hall 40 minutes later with the note in his hand and his face the color of old parchment, and Harry caught him by the arm before he reached the staff table and steered him sideways and said, very quietly, where? 2nd floor bathroom, Ron said. The note says, Harry, it says, I know, Harry said. I know where the entrance is. Ron looked at him. His eyes were bright and his jaw was set with something that was going to become ferocity in about 60 seconds and was currently operating as forced control. Tell me. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, Harry said. I think the entrance is in the pipes. Or connected to the plumbing somehow. He kept Ron's eyes. We go tonight. Not before, because in daylight there are too many people and the basilisk moves during school hours. which means it's being sent, which means whoever's controlling it is active and will know we're coming. He tightened his grip on Ron's arm slightly. I need you focused. Not gone. Ron breathed. She's my sister. I know. That's why you need to be focused. Gone doesn't help her. He held Ron's gaze until he saw the ferocity settle into something harder and more useful. We get Hermione. We plan. We go tonight. What about telling someone, McGonagall? We can tell McGonagall, Harry said. But by the time the school mobilizes a formal response, the thing controlling the diary will know we're coming and it'll have options we don't. He paused. I can speak to the basilisk. McGonagall cannot. That's the advantage, and it doesn't transfer. Ron absorbed this. He folded the note and put it in his pocket, careful and precise, the care of someone who needed to be doing something concrete. Hermione, he said. Already, Harry said. He'd sent a note to the library with a third year 3 minutes ago. They found the entrance at 9 in the evening, in the bathroom, in the pipes, a sink with a small snake etched on the tap, the kind of detail that was invisible if you didn't know to look and completely obvious once you did. Harry stood in front of it and spoke in Parseltongue, 2 words, and the pipe dilated and the floor opened and the darkness below it was absolute. Of course it's a pipe, Ron said. Of course we're going into a pipe. Think of it as a very large slide, Hermione said, with controlled calm. I don't like slides either, Ron said. Harry went first. The slide was long and dark and deposited him in a tunnel underground that smelled of cold water and something else, something older and darker, the smell of a space that had been sealed for 50 years and held something living the entire time. He lit his wand. The tunnel stretched ahead, wide enough to walk 3 abreast, the walls damp, the floor uneven. He heard it immediately. The voice in the walls, much louder down here. Not through pipe and stone anymore, direct, the real voice of the thing, and it was coming from ahead, and it was purposeful. I smell them, it said, in old Parseltongue. They come. Harry answered it. Not in the archaic register, in his own, the Parseltongue Goldtusk had taught him, which was standardized and current and apparently distinct from the ancient dialect enough that what he said came out with a different cadence. He said, Stop. I am speaking to you. Stop. The voice in the walls went quiet. Ron and Hermione, who could not hear the exchange, watched Harry's face with the focused attention of people who understood that something important was happening in a language they didn't have. Who speaks? The voice said, after a moment. Cautious. Ancient. Not frightened, things that old didn't frighten easily, but genuinely uncertain. I speak, Harry said. I am Harry, called Harrek, son of Ragnok, blood of the gold line. I am Parseltongue and I am here for the girl. A long pause. Something shifted in the air of the tunnel. The other one commands me, the basilisk said. The other one is not here, Harry said. I am. The girl lives? She lives. She is, below. She feeds it. What feeds? The shadow. The young dark one. A hissing quality to it now, something that wasn't fear but was close to distaste. It is not as the old masters were. It is hungry and cold and it does not speak properly. Take me to her, Harry said. And close your eyes. Another pause. He felt Ron touch his elbow, not anxiously, just a check, and Harry held up one finger without turning, and Ron understood and went still. Basilisk, Harry said. I am asking you, not commanding. Take me to the girl and keep your eyes closed and I will not harm you tonight. The sound in the walls moved. It's going to guide us, Harry said, in English. Keep your eyes down. Not as a precaution, it'll keep its eyes closed, but the habit is worth having. Move when I move. You just talk to it, Ron said. Yes. You just negotiated with the monster. I asked it nicely, Harry said. It's been locked in a pipe for 50 years under the instructions of something it clearly finds unpleasant. It responded to being treated like it had preferences. He started forward. Keep up. They moved through the tunnels for 10 minutes, following the sound in the walls, and came through a final door, a door with stone serpents on it that opened when Harry hissed, into a long chamber with a flooded floor and great stone pillars twined with carved serpents, and at the far end, under the face of Salazar Slytherin carved huge and inhuman in the stone, a figure on the floor. Ginny lay still and pale, the color that people went when their life was being drawn out of them slowly, and above her a shape was visible, not fully, not physically, but as a shimmer, a density in the air, the adolescent impression of Tom Riddle forming as Ginny diminished. Harry crossed the chamber at a run. He skidded to his knees beside Ginny. Pressed 2 fingers to her throat, pulse, thin and fast but there. She was breathing. He looked up at the shimmer. It looked back at him with Voldemort's eyes in a young man's face, half-formed, half-real, drinking the last of the light from the girl on the floor. Harry Potter, it said. The voice was Voldemort's voice before it was Voldemort's voice, cultured, cold, certain of itself in the particular way that young powerful men were certain before the world had a chance to complicate them. Tom Riddle, Harry said. Put it down. I'm afraid I can't do that, Riddle said. I need her. Without her I know what you need, Harry said. I know exactly what you are and what you're doing and what the diary is. He kept his voice very even. And I'm telling you to put it down. Or what? Riddle said, and the amusement in his voice was genuine, the amusement of someone who found the situation entertaining. You're 12 years old. You came down here with a broken wand and a panicking friend and nothing, the basilisk came through the door. It filled the chamber the way water filled a vessel, inevitably, completely, its scales making a sound against the stone floor like slow applause. Enormous. Ancient. Eyes closed, as Harry had asked, its head moving with the specific movement of something navigating by sound and smell rather than sight. Riddle looked at it. Stay, Harry said, in Parseltongue. The basilisk stopped. You're controlling it, Riddle said. And for the first time the amusement had a different quality. Not gone, but thinner. You actually speak it. You're not using an artifact or an intermediary. No, Harry said. Fascinating. The shimmer of Riddle was moving now, circling slightly, with the instinct of something that was recalculating its position. You're not the Potter I expected. No one ever is, Harry said, which Ron would have appreciated if Ron had been close enough to hear. Here's what happens now. You release Ginny. All of it, everything you took from her, you put it back. I can't put it back, Riddle said. That's not how this works. I've taken what I've taken. Then you stop taking, Harry said. Right now. You've accumulated enough to think clearly. The diary, he reached into Ginny's robe pocket and pulled it out, which made Riddle flinch visibly, the shimmer contracting. The diary is the anchor. Without it, you're nothing again. Smoke. If you destroy it, Riddle said, and the voice had changed register, you destroy her too. She's bound to it now. Whatever I've taken from her, the destruction would. You're lying, Harry said. Am I? Riddle smiled. Are you sure enough to test it? Harry looked at him. Then he looked at the diary. He turned it over in his hands once, the way he turned the bloodstone ring when he needed to think. He thought about Ragnok, the most powerful position in any room is the one no one else wants. He thought about Blood Axe, you don't pull strikes. He thought about Dumbledore, of all people, who had told him in February about his mother, she had an absolute nose for bluff. She said she could smell it. He looked at Riddle and said, you're betting on my uncertainty. You don't know whether your claim is true either. The binding was an accident of the possession, not a design. You're hoping I won't risk it. He held the diary. I think if I destroy the diary, Ginny is released. Not harmed. Released. Riddle's face did something under the shimmer, something compressed and fast and genuinely alarmed. You're wrong, Riddle said, but the certainty was different now. Then neither of us is sure, Harry said. And I'm the one holding the diary. He looked around the chamber. The basilisk fong, broken from something, he'd seen it when he crossed the chamber, a single fong from some earlier encounter, lying against one of the pillars. He picked it up without taking his eyes off Riddle. Last chance, Harry said. Release her or I end this. Riddle moved toward him. Harry drove the fong through the diary. The scream that came out of it was not from Ginny. It was from the diary itself, from the thing anchored in it, and the shimmer of Riddle contorted, not a death exactly, more an unraveling, the specific falling apart of something that had been held together by one thing and had that one thing removed. The light in the chamber changed. Ginny gasped on the floor and color came back into her face with the specific rush of something returning. The ink that poured from the diary as it destroyed itself was black, and it burned where it touched the stone floor, and the shimmer came apart like smoke in wind. Then it was quiet. Harry sat back on his heels. He was breathing hard. His hands were on the diary, and the fong, and both of them were destroyed and done and finished. Ginny sat up with the specific dazed confusion of someone whose memory of the last few months had significant gaps. She looked at Harry. She looked at Ron, who had crossed the chamber when Riddle started screaming and was now crouched beside her with his hand on her shoulder and an expression of fierce, unsteady relief. She looked at the enormous serpent standing still at the far end of the chamber with its eyes closed. What? She said. Long story, Ron said. We're going to tell Mum you were very brave. I wasn't, I don't remember, you were, Harry said. You survived. That's brave enough. He stood. He felt the bruise of the last hour settling into his body, the specific exhausted clarity of someone who had been at high alert for a long time and was beginning to come down. He looked at the basilisk. Thank you, he said, in Parseltongue. The great head moved. Not a bow exactly. An acknowledgement. The other shadow, the basilisk said. It is not finished. No, Harry agreed. Not finished. But smaller than it was. He walked back through the chamber, past the great carved face of Slytherin who had built something terrible and called it legacy, with his friends behind him and the sound of the basilisk settling back into its ancient stillness at his back. He climbed out of the chamber. He breathed cold, clean air. It was almost midnight, and the war wasn't over, but he was alive and Ginny was alive and another piece of Voldemort was gone. He'd take it. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The hospital wing had a particular quality at midnight that it didn't have during the day, quieter, obviously, but more than that. Something stripped of performance. People in beds who were actually hurt rather than theatrically hurt, the magic doing its slow work in the dark, Madame Pomfrey moving between them with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had long since stopped being surprised by the specific varieties of catastrophe that Hogwarts produced. Ginny was in the second bed. Ron was in the chair beside her that Pomfrey had pointedly moved twice and Ron had pointedly moved back. Hermione was in the third bed, not injured but sitting upright with a mug of something hot and her book in her lap at the specific angle that meant she was thinking rather than reading. Harry sat on the windowsill with his knees up and his back against the cold glass and watched the grounds go silver in the moonlight. Dumbledore arrived at 12:30. He came through the door with the quiet economy of someone who had been awake for hours and was managing the fact of Ginny Weasley's condition and the Chamber of Secrets in the same careful internal space where he managed everything, competently, thoroughly, with the particular weight of a man who had been responsible for this castle for 40 years and understood that responsibility as genuinely his. He looked at Ginny first. Then at Ron. Then at Hermione. Then at Harry on the windowsill. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from Harry, which put them approximately level, which Harry understood as deliberate. "Tell me," Dumbledore said. Harry told him. All of it, the tracking of the voice through the walls, the basilisk, the diary, Tom Riddle. He told it without drama, in the chronological sequence, the way he'd been taught to report: event, interpretation, action, outcome. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which was itself informative. The headmaster was a man who had strong instincts about when to ask questions and when to let things arrive in their own order. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "The diary," he said. "You destroyed it. With a basilisk fang." "Yes. That was," Dumbledore paused. "That was exactly right. And it was also extraordinarily dangerous, given the uncertainty about Ginny's binding." "I calculated the risk," Harry said. "The binding was circumstantial, not structural. Riddle's architecture is always about control, and the diary was his control mechanism, not a life link. A life link requires consent or ritual, neither was present." Dumbledore looked at him. "Where did you learn the distinction?" "Goldtusk. Dark Artifact Registry Review. Last summer." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, not quite humor but related to it, the specific reaction of someone encountering a situation where the obvious observation was also the most complicated one. "Of course," he said. "How many are there?" Harry asked. Dumbledore went still. The hospital wing was very quiet. Somewhere outside an owl moved past the window, its wings absolutely silent. "How many what?" Dumbledore said, and his voice was careful in the specific way that careful voices were careful when they were buying time for a decision. "Horcruxes," Harry said. He kept his voice level. "That's what the diary was. I recognized the structure from the artifact registry descriptions, and from what Riddle himself said, the way he talked about needing Ginny, about accumulating enough to think. A Horcrux is a soul fragment housed in an object. He made one. I need to know if he made more." Dumbledore sat with the question for a long moment. Outside, the grounds moved in the slight wind, the moonlit lake ruffling. The flame in the wall sconce between them burned steady. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "How many?" Another pause. "I don't know the exact number," Dumbledore said. "I have suspicions. I have been collecting evidence for years. It is the project I have been engaged in since it became clear that Voldemort's survival of his own curse was not accidental." He looked at Harry. "I had planned to tell you when I was certain. When I had more of the picture." "Tell me now," Harry said. "Whatever you have. Incomplete is better than nothing, and you promised me honesty." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his robes and produced a small leather notebook, worn at the corners in the way things worn at corners meant years of use, and set it on the windowsill between them. "I have been keeping notes since 1982, he said. "Memories, artifacts, historical records. The diary makes, at minimum, 2. I believe there are more. The number is unclear but the intent is legible." He was trying to make himself unkillable. He paused. "And then your mother's sacrifice, introduced a factor he hadn't accounted for." Harry picked up the notebook. Opened it to the first page. Dumbledore's handwriting, small, precise, extraordinarily dense. Notes on the Horcrux theory. The objects. The memories. The chain of reasoning building from 1970 forward with the meticulous dedication of a man who had understood something terrible and decided that understanding it fully was the only responsible response. He read the first 3 pages. "Set it down. You've been building this case for 20 years, Harry said." "Yes." "Alone?" "Largely." Harry looked at the notebook. "I want copies of everything in here. All of it. I want Goldtusk to review it, not to interfere, not to challenge your methodology, but because 2 analytic frameworks working the same evidence are better than one, and Goldtusk's artifact knowledge is the most comprehensive in Britain." Dumbledore considered this. Agreed, he said. And when you find the next piece, when you go looking, when you have something actionable, you tell me. Harry met his eyes. I don't go behind your back and you don't go around mine. Clear? Clear, Dumbledore said. And for the first time since Harry had known him, the word landed without the weight of subtext. Just the word, plain, agreed to. They sat together in the quiet of the Midnight Hospital wing for a while. Ragnok is going to want to speak with you about this, Harry said. About the Horcruxes. His legal team has been focused on the inquiry, but this is a different problem. A physical problem. He'll want to know. I expected as much, Dumbledore said. Your father and I have been, he paused, in the specific way he paused when choosing words with care. We have been developing a working relationship. It is not comfortable. I don't imagine it should be. But it is honest. That's enough, Harry said. Is it? Dumbledore asked, and the question was genuine, not rhetorical, not managed, but actually asked. Harry thought about Ragnok sitting down suddenly at his desk. About Sharpclaw, who had noticed a sideways glance at a cupboard door. About 62 pages of report and an oath-burning stone-deep read in a chamber that was older than the city above it. It's a start, Harry said. The morning was chaotic in the way Hogwarts mornings were chaotic when something large had happened the night before, not the surface chaos of the aftermath but the slower, deeper chaos of a community processing. The story moved fast. Ginny was in the hospital wing, the chamber had been opened and closed, Harry Potter had been involved. The details were wrong in the ways rumor details were always wrong, but the shape of it was right. Harry ate breakfast at the Gryffindor table and let it move around him. Neville was the first person at the table who said anything real. He sat down across from Harry, looked at him steadily with those eyes that had been getting gradually less apologetic since first year, and said, "Are you all right? Not what happened or is it true or any of the other questions currently circling the table. Just the simple one." "Yes," Harry said. "Thank you for asking." Neville nodded once. "My Gran's been following the inquiry," he said. He paused, rearranging something internally. "She said Ragnok was right to file it. She said it took courage." Another pause. "She doesn't say that about many people." "Augusta Longbottom's opinion is worth having," Harry said. "Tell her I said so." Neville looked at him for a moment. The apologetic posture that had been his baseline in first year was almost entirely gone, replaced with something that was still quiet but had a different quality, the quiet of choice rather than diminishment. "I've been thinking about the DA," he said. "Defense. Actual defense practice, not what Lockhart's been doing." "Lockhart leaves at the end of term," Harry said. "I know. But even with someone competent, the practical training, the real application," he touched the edge of his fork against his plate. "I'm good at herbology. I'm not useless in other things, I've never been taught properly. Not the way you have." He looked up. "I wondered if you'd consider running something. Informal. Small." Harry looked at him. He thought about what Ragnok had told him about information and networks and the specific strategic value of people who were underestimated. He thought about the receiving that Blood Axe had trained in him, and about the fact that in this room full of students, some of them were carrying the kind of quiet capability that nobody was developing. "Talk to Ron and Hermione," Harry said. "And think about who else. Not too many, 10, 12 people maximum. Quality over size." He paused. "And Neville, this was a good idea. I want you to know I think that." Neville's expression did the small, foundational thing it had done in first year on the way back from herbology, except this time it was more secure, settling on something that had been building for 2 years. "Right," he said. "Yeah. Okay." The letter from Ragnok came on the third day. It arrived at breakfast, ledger dropping it on Harry's plate with the pointed accuracy of a bird who had been flying this route for 2 years and had opinions about it. Harry opened it and read it through once quickly, then once more slowly. The letter was not about the Horcruxes. He'd sent his report on the chamber the morning after, and Ragnok's response to that would take longer to develop because Ragnok's responses to significant information always took time to develop, which was one of the things Harry most respected about him. The letter was about the inquiry. The first phase had concluded. The Wizengamot had returned a finding. He read the finding twice. Then he put the letter down on the table and sat for a moment with his hands flat on either side of it. Hermione looked at his face. What? He picked the letter up and handed it to her. She read it. Her expression moved through several things in rapid succession. She handed it to Ron. Ron read it. Set it down. Said nothing for a moment. Censure, Hermione said. Formal Wizengamot censure, removal from the Board of Magical Education, mandatory oversight on all Order of Merlin consultation appointments. She was reading the letter again, over Ron's shoulder. That's significant. That's genuinely significant. The Board of Magical Education oversight means he can't control Hogwarts governance unilaterally anymore, Harry said. Every major decision goes through a committee. He still has enormous influence, but the unchecked authority is, he stopped. Goldtusk called it structural diminishment. Not the man. The position. Is it enough? Ron asked. Harry sat with the question. He thought about a 4-year-old in a cupboard. He thought about 67 exhibits and 7 years of preparation. He thought about the specific patient geography of justice, which moved like water, not always visible but always finding the low ground eventually. It's not enough, he said honestly. It's a beginning. The second phase of the inquiry runs next year, and that covers the broader use of institutional authority, the Order of the Phoenix, the Wizengamot quorums, the things beyond the specific case of my guardianship. The structural picture. He looked at his plate. But this, the finding, it establishes the principle. It says this happened, it was wrong, it has consequences. That matters. For you or for the case? Hermione asked, carefully. Both, Harry said. He wrote to Ragnok that afternoon. The letter was short. Goldtusk's work stands. First phase concluded. What comes next? Ragnok's reply was equally short, and arrived within the day. We continue. As we have always continued. Come home for Christmas. Your room has been reorganized. Griphook moved your dragon drawing and I had it properly framed. Don't tell him I told you. Harry read it twice. Folded it once. Put it in his pocket and carried it there for the rest of the day. Lucius Malfoy appeared at Hogwarts on a Thursday, the last week of term, in the company of 9 school governors and the air of a man executing a plan he'd been developing since autumn. Harry was in Transfiguration when it happened and learned of it the way everyone learned of it, through the school's rumor network, which functioned with the speed of a well-managed information system when it wanted to. Dumbledore was being suspended. The governors had invoked their emergency clause, 12 signatures required. Lucius had collected 9, which was technically insufficient, but the argument was that the chamber crisis demonstrated inability to maintain school safety and that was a broader mandate. McGonagall's voice, very controlled, in the entrance hall, this is premature and procedurally questionable. Lucius Malfoy's voice, smooth and certain, the safety of the students cannot wait on procedure. Harry finished his Transfiguration class. Changed one teacup into a teapot, changed it back, handed in his work, and went to find Draco Malfoy. Draco was in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, clearly having heard the same news, with an expression that Harry had learned to read over 2 years, the expression of someone whose internal calculation and external presentation were significantly diverged. Your father, Harry said, stopping in front of him. I know, Draco said. Is this the play you were expecting? Draco looked at him with the exhausted honesty of someone who had been managing expectations for a long time. I didn't know the specifics, he said. I knew he's been angry since the inquiry started. The censure was, he pressed his lips together. He sees it as an attack on the old structure. On everything the families like ours built. Dumbledore's removal was always going to be attractive to him as a countermove. It won't work, Harry said. I know that, Draco said. Does he know that? A pause. He thinks your father's legal campaign weakens Dumbledore enough to make the removal stick. He's miscalculating how the institutional response works. The school board can suspend but they can't install a permanent replacement without Wizengamot approval, and the Wizengamot has just spent 6 months demonstrating it has an independent relationship with Gringotts. He said it flatly, without pleasure. He's a brilliant man. He's also been in a specific social architecture so long he thinks it's geography. Tell me something, Harry said. Just between us. What do you want? Not your father. Not the family position. You. Draco looked at him. This was the question Harry had never quite asked directly, and Draco knew it was the question, and for a moment his face did the specific work of someone deciding whether honesty was safe. I want to not be managing this for the rest of my life, Draco said. Quietly, with no performance in it. I want to be good at something and have it be the thing itself, not what it means politically. He looked at the window. I'm good at potions. I'm very good at potions. And every time I'm good at potions it means something about family alliances and blood status and I am so, he stopped. Tired, Harry said. Yes. Harry nodded. Your mother's accounts are in excellent order, he said again. He said it the way he'd said it on the train 2 years ago, the same words, but this time they carried the whole weight of 2 years of both of them knowing what those words meant. She's been making independent decisions for a long time. Draco looked at him sharply. She'll know what your father is doing today doesn't help either of them, Harry said. Regardless of her public position. He paused. The war that's coming, the real one, when Voldemort finds a body, it's going to require choices. I'm not telling you which choice to make. I'm telling you the choice exists and that you should make it while you still have room to. Draco stared at him. You're 12, he said. Allegedly, Harry said, which was fully Ron's fault for that becoming his verbal reflex. Draco made the sound again, the frustrated, involuntary half-laugh. Then he said, very carefully, if I needed somewhere that wasn't my father's house, at some point, Gringotts' guest quarters are exceptionally secure, Harry said. And my father has never turned away anyone who asked for sanctuary in good faith. He held Draco's eyes. Good faith being the operative requirement. I know, Draco said. I know you know, Harry said. That's why I told you. He left Draco in the corridor and went to the entrance hall. Lucius Malfoy was still there. The 9 governors had arranged themselves around the entrance hall with the self-conscious gravity of people executing an authority they'd been told they had and were slightly uncertain of. Dumbledore stood in the center of it with the specific quality of stillness he had in moments of real pressure, not diminished, not performing dignity, simply present, completely himself. Harry walked in through the side door and stood near the back. Lucius registered him immediately. His pale eyes moved to Harry with the calculated assessment Harry had been cataloging since Draco's descriptions and their one conversation at Diagon Alley in 2nd year. Lucius Malfoy was everything his son would be with the softness trained out, the same intelligence, the same social fluency, the same genuine competence at reading power structures, but compressed into something that had made one large irrevocable choice and spent 2 decades managing the consequences. Mr. Potter, Lucius said, in the tone of someone acknowledging a complication. Mr. Malfoy, Harry said pleasantly. I was hoping to speak with you about the suspension motion. A flicker. This is a matter for the Board of Governors, Lucius said. It isn't a student concern. Gringotts has a vested institutional interest in the governance of Hogwarts under the Educational Charter of 1853, Harry said, keeping his voice conversational. Clause 14, subsection 3, any change to the headship requires notification of the bank's Institutional Oversight Committee when the current headmaster has an active inquiry relationship with the bank's legal department. He paused. Which Dumbledore does. As of November. Which means this action, proceeding without that notification, is in breach of the charter. Silence in the entrance hall. One of the governors, a small woman in green robes who had been standing slightly apart from Lucius's arrangement, said, very carefully, "Is that correct?" "I'm happy to have Goldtusk confirm it by owl," Harry said. "He can have a response here within the hour." Lucius looked at Harry with an expression that was not yet hostile but was no longer smooth. "You're citing an educational charter from 1853, he said. "Goldtusk is very thorough," Harry said. "He started reviewing Hogwarts governance documentation in 1987. He's found several interesting clauses. This child," Lucius said, and now the smoothness had an edge under it, "has been running a legal campaign from a bank since he was 5 years old, and you are all standing here treating him as though—" "I'm standing here," Harry said, citing a legally valid charter clause in a governance proceeding that I have standing in. He kept his voice absolutely level. "The clause exists. The breach is real. The notification wasn't given because you weren't aware of the inquiry relationship, which is a reasonable error, but it means the suspension motion can't proceed without the notification being filed first." He looked at the 9 governors, not at Lucius. "I'm not asking anyone to reverse a decision," he said. "I'm noting a procedural requirement. File the notification, give the committee 5 business days to respond, and then proceed. Everything done properly, everything done on record." The small woman in green robes said, "He's right about the charter. I reviewed it last year during the accreditation cycle." She looked at Lucius. "The notification is required." Lucius Malfoy stood in the entrance hall of Hogwarts and was, for the first time in Harry's observation, visibly recalculating rather than managing a known position. He looked at Harry with eyes that were doing something complicated, not the arranged calculation of the first encounter but something more genuine, the specific look of someone encountering an argument they can't immediately defeat and knowing it. "You're Ragnok's son," he said. Not an insult. A recognition. "I am," Harry said. "He trained you well." "He did." Harry paused. "The notification is a formality. It will be filed, the committee will respond, and the suspension question will be reviewed properly. No one loses anything except a week's timing." He looked at Lucius steadily. "Is the timing important? Or is the outcome important?" A long pause. "The outcome," Lucius said. "Then a week changes nothing," Harry said. "File the notification. Do this correctly. Doing it incorrectly gives everyone who opposes it a procedural ground to reverse it permanently, which is the opposite of what you want." He had given Lucius Malfoy a face-saving path. He had done it deliberately. He watched Lucius recognize that it was deliberate and process the recognition, and underneath the processing he could see the same exhaustion he'd seen in Draco, the specific tiredness of someone who had been playing the same game at the same table for a very long time. "Very well," Lucius said. The suspension was deferred. The governors filed out. Dumbledore stood in the entrance hall and looked at Harry with the expression Harry had first seen in the library in first year, the one that had evolved over 2 years from managed assessment to something closer to genuine respect. Clause 14, subsection 3, Dumbledore said. "Goldtusk found it in October," Harry said. "He said it might be useful eventually." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I imagine he did." A pause. "Harry, the notification will be filed," Harry said. "The committee will review. I'll recommend to Ragnok that the review conclude without objection, because Dumbledore's removal from Hogwarts right now is not in anyone's interest with what's coming." He picked up his bag. But Lucius needs to understand that the governance structure here has more layers than he's accounted for. You're protecting my position, Dumbledore said. And the tone was not gratitude exactly, it was the tone of someone who found the situation genuinely disorienting. A man who had spent 40 years protecting other people encountering the novel experience of being protected himself. I'm protecting the functional leadership of the school, Harry said. Which you are, despite everything. He paused at the door. Also, I did it partly because Lucius Malfoy needed to understand that I exist and I'm watching, and this was an efficient way to do both simultaneously. Very Goblin, Dumbledore said. Very sensible, Harry said. They're often the same thing. The last days of term moved with the particular velocity of term endings, the compression of everything unresolved into a shrinking timeline, the specific noise of students packing and post-arriving and the school doing its slow seasonal exhalation. Harry moved through it and let the noise be noise, below the receiving, and focused on the things that were real. Ginny was out of the hospital wing on Wednesday. She came to dinner and sat beside Ron and was quieter than she'd been at the start of term, which was appropriate, and once during the meal she looked at Harry across the table with a directness that was not her usual diffidence and said, "Thank you." "You survived," Harry said. "That was most of it. I handed the diary I gave it to someone to look after and she stopped." "Not your fault," Harry said. "How are you sure?" "Because the thing in the diary was specifically designed to make it not your fault," Harry said. "The design intent was possession and extraction. You were 12 years old and it was a 50-year-old fragment of the darkest wizard of the century. The asymmetry is not small." Ginny looked at him for a moment. Something in her face was deciding something. "You're strange," she said. "Not, I mean that well." "I know," Harry said. "I've been told." She went back to her dinner. Ron, beside her, nudged Harry's foot under the table without looking up from his plate, which was the specific communication of someone saying thank you for handling that correctly in the language of 12 years of sibling. The night before the train, Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The fire had burned down to red coals and the room was warm and dim, and the castle breathed around him, its deep, alive, stone and magic breathing that he'd been listening to for 2 years and still found remarkable. He was thinking about the year. The chamber, the diary, Riddle's face in the shimmer. The basilisk in the pipes. The inquiry finding. Lucius Malfoy in the entrance hall, recalculating. Dumbledore's notebook full of 20 years of patient dread. Neville's idea about the defense group. Draco in the corridor saying I want to not be managing this for the rest of my life. He was 12 years old. In the context of everything that was moving, the Horcruxes, the war coming, Voldemort rebuilding in whatever form rebuilding took for a shade without a body, 12 years old was both the whole truth and entirely irrelevant. Ron came down the stairs. He was carrying 2 mugs, the hot chocolate that the house elves made available in the common room at night, which Harry had discovered in first year and which was possibly the best thing about Hogwarts, and he sat in the chair beside Harry without ceremony and handed one over and looked at the coals. "You're thinking too loud," Ron said. "Sorry." "Don't be. I could hear it from upstairs." He wrapped his hands around his mug. "What's the thing that's actually bothering you?" Because the inquiry went well and Ginny's fine and Lucius Malfoy got sorted out and by any reasonable measure the year was a success. "So what's the thing?" Harry turned his mug in his hands. "He made multiple Horcruxes," he said. "Dumbledore thinks at least 4 more, maybe more than that. Each one is a piece of him. Each one has to be found and destroyed. And even if we find all of them and destroy all of them, the prophecy still, you'll deal with it," Ron said. "You don't know that." "No," Ron said. "I don't. But I know you." He looked sideways at Harry with the uncomplicated directness that was the thing Harry liked best about him, no strategic layer, just Ron, saying the thing he actually meant. You went down a pipe to fight a basilisk and a piece of Voldemort's soul on a Tuesday in December and came back with my sister and a broken fong and an expression like you'd had a mildly difficult meeting. You're going to be all right. That's not a logical argument, Harry said. No, Ron agreed. It's a different kind of argument. He drank his chocolate. My mum wants to invite you for the summer. Before Gringotts. The first 2 weeks. Harry looked at him. Your mum. She's, mum. She heard about the chamber and she wants. Ron's voice had the specific mixture of affectionate exasperation and genuine warmth that was his natural register when talking about his family. She said, and I'm quoting, that any child who goes into a chamber full of monsters for her daughter is welcome at her table any day of the week and twice on Sundays. Something happened in Harry's chest. Small, warm, the specific warmth of unexpected plenty. I'll have to ask Ragnok, he said. Obviously, Ron said. Hermione's coming too. Week 2. You've planned this. Mum planned this. I was consulted. He looked at the coals. Harry, obviously you've been fine. I know you're fine. I know you're more than fine. But sometimes you're so contained that I worry about the spaces between being Ragnok's son and being, just 12. Harry looked at him. 2 weeks at the Burrow is just being 12, Ron said. Chess and stupid food and the twins doing things that'll probably get someone's eyebrows removed. Nothing that matters. He glanced at Harry. Is that, okay? For you? I'm not trying to, yes, Harry said. Simply. Completely. Yes. Ron nodded. Right. Good. He turned back to the fire. Also, I should warn you, there's a garden gnome problem. Dad's tried everything and they keep coming back. I know a goblin pest control protocol that might work, Harry said. I'm going to tell Dad that and he's going to be delighted, Ron said, in a way that will make Mum slightly concerned. Harry smiled. Tell him. They sat with the coals and the warm quiet until the fire went gray and then cold, and didn't talk about Horcruxes or prophecies or the war that was coming, and it was the most valuable thing Harry had done all year. The train was crowded and loud, and somewhere in the middle of it Hermione produced her revised reading list for the summer, 17 texts, annotated, with a suggested reading order, and Ron accepted it with the expression of a man being handed a life sentence and made a note to actually read at least 4 of them. Harry was watching the countryside go by when Griphook appeared at the compartment door, which was impossible because Griphook was in London, except that it was Griphook's reflection in the window, and Harry turned and the compartment was empty for a moment in the specific way compartments went empty when someone used a port key to arrive. Griphook sat down across from him and folded his hands. Your father sent me, he said. On the train? Harry said. He wanted me here when you arrived back, Griphook said. He said. He paused in the way he paused when he was relaying something that required precise reproduction. He said the 2nd year is done. The diary is destroyed. The inquiry has its first finding. You are still here. He looked at Harry. He also said tell him the dragon won. Harry went still. The dragon won, he said. What? I told him, Griphook said, at the start of your 3rd year of training with me, that you had asked the question every day for 2 years and that you'd started saying beautiful when you said it, instead of asking. He said it with the flat precision of a goblin who found emotional disclosure professionally relevant. He asked me what I'd said. Harry thought about the morning in the training room, watching light come up over the Black Lake. Beautiful, Griphook had said. The first time in 11 years of Harry asking. You told him, Harry said. I tell him everything relevant, Griphook said, which was the most honest statement of their 3-person dynamic Harry had ever heard. What did he say to that? Griphook looked out the window. The countryside was going golden in the late afternoon, rolling green hills and hedgerows and small clusters of trees dark against the sky. His expression held the specific containment of a goblin who had feelings about things and expressed them in the vocabulary of professional commitment. He said, Griphook told him, that he knew when Sharpclaw opened the cupboard door and you asked if they were there to fix the boiler. That you'd be, he stopped. Started again, more carefully. That something that could ask that question, in those circumstances, was something the world needed more of. He turned back to Harry. He said the dragon won the moment you chose to ask. Harry looked at the window. The countryside outside was very beautiful, ordinary, alive, the specific beauty of things that didn't know they were being looked at. Green hills. Light on water. A hawk turning lazy circles over a field. He put his forehead against the glass, briefly. When he straightened up, his face was the blank ledger, because there were other compartments and the train was full of people, and the blank ledger was the professional response. But Griphook had known him for 7 years and the blank ledger did not work on Griphook. He'll be at the gate? Harry asked. He'll be at the gate, Griphook said. Harry turned back to the window. He thought about everything that was coming, the Horcruxes, the war, the long work of dismantling what needed to be dismantled and building what needed to be built. He thought about a prophecy that said one must kill the other and about Ragnok saying prophecy is a constraint, not a plan. He thought about Neville's defense group and Draco in the corridor and Hermione's annotated reading list and Ron's 2 mugs of hot chocolate at 2 in the morning. He thought about Dumbledore's notebook and the 20 years of patient work inside it and the strange, complicated possibility that the most difficult person in his situation might also, eventually, be useful. He thought about Ginny saying you're strange and meaning it well. He thought about his mother writing contract briefs in the bank, arguing with Goldtusk, making someone laugh in a building of stone and gold and ancient purpose. He thought about the dragon drawing that was apparently now properly framed on a wall somewhere in Gringotts, the wobbly green shape that a 4-year-old had made in a cupboard because making things was the only freedom available. The dragon won. The train moved through the golden afternoon toward London, toward the gateway at King's Cross, toward Griphook walking beside him through the barrier and ledger circling overhead, toward the broad marble steps of Gringotts going down into the stone, toward the deep corridors and the flame stones and the room that was his room, properly his, the dragon properly framed on the wall. Toward Ragnok at the gate. He pressed his hand flat against the cool glass of the window and felt the bloodstone ring warm against his finger and thought, the war isn't over. The war was not over and it was not going to be easy and there were pieces of a shattered soul scattered somewhere in Britain and a prophecy in the Department of Mysteries with his name on it and a Dark Lord rebuilding somewhere in the dark. But he was not a sad boy from a cupboard waiting for someone to make decisions about his life. He was not a symbol someone had written in advance. He was not the story Dumbledore had been telling, or the weapon Voldemort had accidentally created, or the political piece that various careful people had been trying to move for a decade. He was Harry. He was Harrek. He was Lily's son and Ragnok's son and the friend of 2 people who were in the compartment behind him reading and doing chess problems and would come back in 10 minutes when they'd given him enough quiet. He was someone Bloodaxe had trained and Goldtusk had lectured and Griphook had been honest with and Neville had asked because Neville had looked at him and seen someone worth asking. He was 12 years old and he was going home and the war wasn't over but neither was he. He took his hand off the window. He turned around and called down the compartment, Ron. Hermione. Come back. I want to go over Goldtusk's Horcrux analysis before we get in. Ron appeared in the doorway. Now? We're 20 minutes out. 12 minutes, Harry said. You've been timing the journey since, of course you have. Ron dropped into his seat. Right. Fine. What's the analysis? Hermione was already sitting down, already opening her bag, already pulling out the copied notes with the specific satisfaction of someone whose reading list had just become relevant faster than even she had anticipated. The memory Dumbledore shared, the Slytherin locket reference, do you think it's at the Black family house? The tapestry records suggest, Grimmauld Place, Harry said. Probably. The Black family's historical connection to Slytherin's line is documented in the property registry, Griphook said, from his corner, without looking up from the report he was reading. Black family ownership of Grimmauld Place dated to 1754. I have the full chain of title. Ron stared at him. He's been here the whole time. Since London Bridge, Griphook said. Why didn't he was busy, Griphook said, turning a page. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked back with the expression that meant this is what my life is like, yes. Ron accepted this with the grace of someone who had been accepting increasingly unusual things since a Tuesday on the Hogwarts Express 2 years ago and had decided it was worth it. Right, Ron said. The locket. Go. Outside the train window, London was rising from the countryside, the city assembling itself from edges and skylines, the Thames catching afternoon light, the world vast and complicated and full of both problem and possibility, the way it always was when you were young enough to believe that both things were equally real. Harry opened his notes. The war wasn't over. They got to work.